Metal Gear Solid 4 is a stealth shooter. Other games in the Metal Gear Solid franchise were mainly stealth action games, with the core method of conflict resolution being traversal. Metal Gear Solid 4 makes shooting specifically the core method of conflict resolution. It is not space divided by time, but space divided by shooting angles. For the most part, there is a time element, but rarely is an enemy trooper in such a position where his orientation, his direction is more important than his position in the map relative to you. Ultimately, the relevance of position is whether you can dispatch an enemy from the firing angles available to you, not whether this position, the player's position, is efficient for traversal from one section of the level to the next. It is also more micro-positional, since the player's specific stance and current camo pattern are a major factor in whether they are detected. All the controls are changed to reflect this, as well as the camera, but most importantly, the player can now move and shoot. Firing a weapon is no longer a sacrifice of one thing for another, it's the fundamental gameplay resolution. The shooting is further enhanced with explicit cover mechanics that replace the press and lean function from previous games, with Old Snake being able to attach himself to vertical surfaces or obstructions. For obvious reasons, this has both stealth and action implements, but in a microcosmic way that demonstrates that the whole resolution of gameplay is within or revolves around shooting mechanics. Metal Gear Solid 4 is actually a very slow, methodical cover shooter. It is not bad because the player's traversal is designed in relation to enemy senses and enemy traversal to produce the result of slow, methodical gameplay, but because of the weight of all the extraneous systems in the game that really only exist to diminish the player's capacity to play it. The traversal mechanics, like I said, are not actually bad. Old Snake is slower since he's old, at least biologically. He can move in 3 stances, standing, crouching, or prone, and at 2 different speeds in each stance. In the case of slow movement while prone, it's practically pointless since it barely covers any ground. So already we have at least one partially extraneous design feature. Snake can aim and move from third person and even move while aiming in first person, as well as lean, but the ability to look over an object in first person has been removed. You can also hang and even swim, but these are uncommon to the point of them being irrelevant. Additionally, the cover system contextualizes crouching and standing while pressed against a surface and allows you to, on some occasions, squeeze between surfaces or traverse ledges. Of course, since it's cover, you can aim and shoot from it as well. One of the major expenses paid by traversal in Metal Gear Solid's transformation into a shooter is the fact that Snake is now very slow. And I mean very slow. Raiden and Snake could cover tons of ground just with the analog stick held to the wall in the previous games, but now Old Snake can barely cross the street expediently. The final and most important contextual stance is rolling. Rolling is only available while aiming, or at least with R1, which is the aiming button held down, while using the X button to move parallel to your current viewing angle, which is locked while rolling. You have to stop moving in order to change direction. Rolling being silent, extremely low profile, and simultaneously allowing you to shoot the enemy whenever you clear a corner means that in most cases, it's the best and most efficient form of undetectable traversal. When rolling is combined with other systems like the camo and solid eye, it creates what I call the roll everywhere effect, which is different but similar to the issues described in my previous review. Not issues that MGS2 had, but that other Metal Gears had. where a plurality of specific solutions in answer-based design means that generally only the most universally effective solution will ever be used. Rolling works very well. Given the amount of possible movement modes in Metal Gear Solid 4, this seems to be the case. Rolling works very well with Octocamo, better than most other forms of movement besides prone, and since it's faster than prone, you're obviously always going to use it over the prone crawl and caterpillar crawl. Since your body is always in contact with the surface you're rolling on, you'll generally end up immediately taking the pattern that you're on top of whenever you stop rolling, and stay in roughly 75% camo rating from one maneuver to the next, which, if you remember, MGS3 is basically invisible if you're more than 10 feet away. The Solid Eye on top of this provides you a minimap. Not a Soliton radar, importantly, but a minimap, allowing you to know what's around a given obstruction, to orient yourself relative to that enemy and the environment, and roll accordingly in order to clear the threat efficiently. You do this in virtually every section of the game that actually involves stealth, which unfortunately is not as many sections as it should be, but that's, again, a different point. Whenever it comes down to not being detected, rolling is the best. There's not much reason to take the risk of other modes of movement. The camo system's purpose, originally, was to influence the player's routing through the level, as well as force him to use micro-positioning, like ducking down into a patch of grass to stay undetected. Pick one pattern, and you could stealthily move to place W and X. Pick another, and you could maybe move to place Y and Z. But the choice was not locked in. You could switch at any time by pausing the game, partially contributing to me designating Subsistence as Menu Gear Solid 3. But additionally, the necessity of choice in the MGS3 camo system is obliterated by the presence of spider camo, allowing you to run through entire levels as long as you stock up on food first. In MGS4, you can just do this if you roll everywhere. There's no need to do the stop and adjust thing with your camo, using the cover system like the developers clearly expected you to, since rolling means you're doing it almost instantly whenever you stop to adjust your angle. Thereby, we've created a problem. If camo is supposed to determine routing, but now routing determines camo, then what's the point of having camo? All it does is slow down gameplay while de-emphasizing the necessity of choice between different routes of traversal. It would actually emphasize traversal more if you were locked into one camo pattern from the beginning of each act. It at least resolves the problem of pausing to swap patterns and tries to integrate it into gameplay. So I can appreciate that Octocamo is a much more legitimate way to slow down and make traversal much more methodical. But at the more extreme ends of its use, it often, but not always, becomes degenerate and pointless. The Solid Eye adds to the benefit of rolling everywhere by letting you know, usually, if something is around a corner that you can't see. The Solid Eye, like I said, gives you a mini-map, even on extreme, by the way, so it's clearly intentional that you know your surroundings to this degree all the time, which is a very questionable choice given the fact that radar was not permitted on any of the previous Metal Gears. Additionally, you can even see your own viewing angle, allowing you to better line up your sight to take the shot as you round any corner, which is more proof that this game is clearly meant to be a shooter. You are clearly meant to resolve enemy encounters by shooting. Ultimately, the result of MGS4's shooter mechanics comes out to the player clearing corners efficiently, which rolling does better than any other form of movement. There's nothing inherently wrong with this fact. Having such cover shooter design for your stealth game is not bad at all, but the implementation, the result of it based on how you balanced and designed your mechanics, is certainly questionable and not of much particular merit. And then Psyche comes into play. Psyche and stress, since they are technically two different measurements in the game, are two of the worst mechanics I've ever had to deal with in a game I actually finished. I'm pretty sure I used that exact vocabulary, that exact sentence structure to describe something before, but the fact that I can't remember what I was describing off the top of my head means that Psyche is much worse than whatever that was. Psyche is essentially a replacement for stamina. It determines how effective Snake is at his maneuvers, how well he can do them, and how often he can do them without stopping because of pain or exhaustion. Now, if it were stamina, that would be acceptable. If the means of its loss, if the means by which the meter is expended were comprehensible to the player, then it would be okay. But Psyche is lost by means that are incomprehensible to the player. Old Snake, for some reason, gets stressed about virtually anything. He can enter combat highs standing still. It makes zero sense. Yes, you can talk to Rosemary about it, but leaving a full tutorial for the system behind a bunch of codec calls is also bad game design on its own.
So I was originally going to make the point that if your stress gets too high, you can get a combat high, but that's not even true. If you look at this footage, my stress isn't even in the red before I get a combat high. So it turns out even after playing this game twice, I know less about stress and Psyche than I thought I did. The point, though, is that no one can really know in the game what is going to cause stress, whether you're going to have stress, how much stress you're going to receive from any given situation, the effects of that stress. Like, it's a completely incomprehensible system on the player's end.
Either way, the result of these two systems is that you often have to stop playing the game and hide somewhere in order to replenish them. Otherwise, you will not be able to maneuver and play the game effectively. You will get detected and you will die. It wouldn't be so bad if you could, like stamina or even health, just refill the meter instantly by consuming an item, but that's not always how it works. Even using a compress, the one thing supposedly for Psyche, takes forever. The first time I consumed one, I couldn't tell if it did anything at all. I literally ate all the ones I had and saw no effect. Apparently, you need to take a full minute for stress to be reduced to 0, even with an item built to reduce stress. Why? It doesn't make sense diegetically or non-diegetically. Sorry, but meter management as punishment for playing the game is bad design. Yes, you do get punished to a greater degree by cautions and alerts, but you also get stress when the enemy is looking for you, or just being outside during combat. It's insane. Anything in this game stresses out Snake. Diegetically, this means that old Snake is getting stressed about the situations he spent his entire life in. That doesn't make sense. The system doesn't have a function. It doesn't affect routing because you're always getting stress on every route you take through every level. It's a stealth game, yet even being around enemies while totally undetected, even without a caution, will afford the player a punishment through a meter which affects their ability to perform within the game. It is universal injury to the player no matter what, and yet the player is deducted score for using recovery items too. The conclusion we're meant to draw is that the devs want us to play the game quickly, yet the whole game is designed to be slow and tactical, based on acquiring good firing angles and pausing to stay camouflaged in the environment. So the design contradicts itself at the most basic level. Camouflage itself was redesigned to make gameplay slower, but simultaneously we have a meter that ruins the game when we play it according to those rules. I hate to make the comparison to MGS3 again, but in Menu Gear Solid 3 you only need to interact with those menus if you were doing poorly. They became more extraneous as you got better. Less so for stamina, but absolutely for the medicine system. In MGS4, the systems are ruining your gameplay 24/7 since good gameplay, good performance in game doesn't diminish their negative effects. It's almost antithetical to the idea of playing a game. Almost as horrible is the shopping. Why do we have an in-game store? For what purpose? Clearly, it is meant to regulate and reward the player when he conforms to the scoring system, because when you score highly, you get more Drebin points. That would be reasonable. The player beats the game rewards him with money to buy stuff that helps him beat the game more efficiently. Of course, meta progression is pretty much always bad, and is in this case as well, but in premise it's certainly not the worst, since the currency is directly tied to how well you play. It's perfectly reasonable in the low difficulties, that is the difficulties below extreme, where you can still purchase non-lethal items with Drebin points. Yet when you play on normal difficulty, which is unlocked by the way, max difficulty should always be available to begin with, you are prevented from buying non-lethals. And the only way to get the highest rank, the highest score, and the most Drebin points is to play non-lethally. So the supposedly correct way to play is caught in a self-contradiction of design. Either you gain points to buy stuff to help you do better in the game, or you're just gaining points for no reason. So basically on the low difficulties, you're actually scoring well in the game to do better. You're scoring well to hypothetically perform better when you're able to purchase more efficient and better items in the next playthrough. But in the max difficulty, you're just, in the max difficulty, you don't even interact with the shop. It's literally pointless. There's nothing you can buy in there except more ammo for lethals. There's another contradiction on top of this, since the game scores against using lethals, yet forces you to use them multiple times throughout your playthrough, thereby invalidating the premise of not using lethals in the scoring system. Shop and the score are in direct conflict with each other at the highest level of gameplay, which means that the purpose of difficulty is itself contradicted. Would be contradicted again by the fact that you can only attain the high score, the big boss emblem, on the highest difficulty. Clearly, if difficulty indeed purifies activity, then the point of not being able to purchase non-lethals on extreme is to tell the player that you're not meant to shoot tranquilizers around willy-nilly. You're meant to be extremely tactical, track your shots, and route according to pickup locations. Yet the exact opposite occurs on regular difficulty with non-lethals, but on extreme difficulty with lethals, because as long as you have sufficient funds, you have sufficient ammo. All of this essentially means that you can't buy a single important item in the shop that will be relevant to your extreme playthrough. No chaff, stuns, smokes, recovery items, nothing. And that's another thing. You should be able to buy recovery items in the shop. Because if the shop is irrelevant to score, then why can't we buy recovery items? Why can we buy infinite ammo but not infinite rations? Even out of the shop items you can buy, or on normal difficulty you would be expected to buy, out of all 70 of them, only 9 at most are going to be used. Just period, on any difficulty. That's 12.85% of the total. You designed all this and only want me to use a little more than an eighth of it? If it's in the game, force the player to use it or remove it. Otherwise, you're just wasting code, you're wasting storage. Not to mention that all the attachments are pointless too, besides the silencers, which you'll pretty much only use to take out the scarabs. Sometimes, if you run out of chaff. If you want the player to route around pickups, then you actually need to do that on every difficulty, rather than give him the option to infinitely purchase ammo upon pausing the game. Additionally, do not have a whole shop to reinforce gameplay that you score against and that diminishes the value of routing on principle of the gameplay you score for. Metal Gear Solid 4 doesn't feature game over if detected. The player needs to be able to reset quickly on failure. Otherwise, you're telling me that alerts, the failure state of the stealth gameplay, are actually acceptable and not really failure. That might jive if you only account for all the guns in the game and assume that you're meant to fight back during an alert. But in reality, you are still scored against alerts and kills. So what's the point in experiencing the alert if ultimately it just means that you've already failed? In the end, all it produces is a little show of how idiotic the AI is and how it's obviously not programmed to deal with alerts. Every stealth game needs an option to restart at whatever checkpoint or save point the designers pick upon failure. Player fails, give him an option to restart immediately. Don't force me to do this stupid little song and dance when I get an alert and have to wait for the bad guys to kill me. Okay, this is extremely basic. The last issue is purely technical. The game doesn't run at a consistent frame rate. It's one thing to have your game run at a low frame rate. It's another to not even be consistent in optimizing the game for the low frame rate you're targeting. A lot of the game can't be played without the solid eye due to all the visual noise like smoke and debris everywhere, which not only obscures your view, but makes the game lag a ton. I suspect that this is because they were going to port it to Xbox 360 and weren't going to fully optimize it for the PS3, because it's ridiculous. You make the supposedly like the game to have on the PS3 and you can't even run it at 30, much less 60. Come on. No, that's not acceptable. Disclosure time, I did play the first run of this game belligerently using the bandana. I won't really be evaluating that gameplay that in depth for the purpose of my review, but I will note that I was pissed off because
the game doesn't tell you you can't purchase non-lethals going into extreme. Although more often it was just used so I wouldn't have to repurchase lethal ammo from the shop every time I ran out on the railgun or rocket launcher.
The second time I played through without the bandana, but the beginning of the third act is so infuriating to play more than once that I couldn't sanction replaying it in its entirety. Even for integrity's sake. Probably an hour saved, maybe more. I just hate that stupid part so much. It gives me a migraine. I don't need to play the beginning of Act 3 more than once to know that it sucked. I've already spent too much time on it given the amount of continues I had to use. Well, not even continues, actually, full reloads because of how poorly the continue system is designed in that section. It's awful. It's the worst section in the game, hands down. Furthermore, I'd like to add that not having infinite ammo or non-lethals from one playthrough to another didn't really change that much, since you can stock up to 50 rounds in your tranquilizer anyways. And the pickups that you need aren't even that out of the way. In fact, sometimes the pickups will even be on your way to the next section. If the way you force the player to route isn't any different, at least not significantly different than letting the player constantly buy ammo, then there's no point in not letting them buy ammo. That you created a system where a player can just grind points and have infinite ammo to begin with is still worse. Before we jump into the level design, I do want to say that the core design of MGS4, the movement, cover, and shooting mechanics, even the camo, are not truly that bad. Guns of the Patriots is essentially vulgar stealth, like vulgar Latin, to MGS2's classical stealth. It adds in a huge micro-positional element with the octo camo, cover, and shooting mechanics, but keeps the macro positioning of strict enemy patrols, though it loosens that slightly by making most of the encounters their own events rather than a web of recurring movement patterns. It is very slow and methodical to its credit, since it was designed to be like that. They did make a different game by disincentivizing traversal, pure traversal, and adding shooter mechanics. It's an interesting idea. Rarely is a mechanic designed so poorly that it is on its own bad, even disregarding its implementation in the level design. Now, meta progression like Drebin's Shop is one of those rarities, as is the Psyche system, since in one case you are locking the full game behind grind, and in the other case you are punishing the player for playing. At least the game is mechanically sound in the first two layers with the traversal, shooting, and camo systems, but it's this final third layer of basically crap that makes the game get really ridiculous and stupid. Guns of the Patriots is divided into 5 acts. Liquid Sun, Solid Sun, Third Sun, Twin Suns, and Old Sun. Really creative there. My favorite part has got to be the amazing unskippable cutscenes put into the beginning, because it's like a TV show. Wow, that's so interesting and awesome and totally enhances the gameplay. No, this is actually terrible, and this is exactly why cutscenes need to be skippable, because if someone already knows the deal and just wants to play the game again, or even if they do want to see the cutscenes again, if they for whatever reason don't want to see the cutscene that they already saw, you should let them skip that cutscene. Once you actually spawn into the game, you're on the other side of a crashed truck. There's nothing here except a ration. No threat of detection or failure. Why not just start the player at this cutscene and with full rations? There's no difference. After you walk across the block and get another cutscene, you have to dodge geckos and then duck into this building, after which you will receive another cutscene. I'm not really going to complain about the fact that these cutscenes are here because you can actually skip them, so they're not really relevant. All right? It's not like they're not really destructive to the tempo of the game. The geckos here aren't really threatening. In fact, there's not much reason to worry about them, given you can basically walk right under them. The next part with the APC is somewhat difficult, since you're deprived of your gear, even on a New Game Plus. In fact, it's a look into a game that would actually be difficult at all, or anywhere close to as challenging as the Boss Extreme would imply. What is cool is you can use your given firearms to distract the enemy while out of sight. The strategy I used involved turning into this building out of the gate, firing at the wall to get the attention of the street PMCs, moving quickly towards the APC to skip the cutscene, then entering the next building. These two guys are so hard to get past. I could basically never get it. Unfortunately, I did enter the next section with an alert on this playthrough, and I'm not happy about that. Next up, we've basically got a big corridor with alternative approaches on adjacent sides. My strat for this was to take the high ground, going up the stairs to the right, taking it a little slowly so the patrol in the center over here doesn't see me, but fast enough so that I can get to this guy before he turns around. Drop him and then move along the ruined second story of this building, preferably prone. As you can see, Octo Camo is a big factor in most of these movements. Only one of them got me seen. Not alerted though, thankfully. The really hard part is this maneuver here. I almost made it without getting detected, though I'm not sure if rolling would have gotten me further based on how much slower rolling is than crouch walking. These two segments can be appreciated for depriving you of your gear and forcing you to do an approach basically without using any of the inherent shooter mechanics. But that begs a question, why are they the only sections with this approach in the entire game? The segments aren't bad, the encounter rate is sufficient, but I will say we can't really say that the molarity was high because it only uses half of the fundamental mechanics of the game. After this, you meet Otacon in the Mark II and acquire your gear. You're supposed to get to this resistance hideout on the other side of the block, and there's a big building in your way. PMC armor is approaching from the left, and you can either take the right or left side of the building in question to get inside. The long way is a little more difficult and lengthy, and in hindsight, probably way less effective, but it seems a little safer. The challenge on either approach is that in order for the resistance to not shoot you, you have to wear either your disguise or Altair's outfit, but these are both very noticeable to the PMCs. The long way takes you to the left of the building slowly. You have to neutralize this guy, then this guy, although you might be able to roll and not have to interact with him. With the short way, you take the right side, tranquilize these two, and then just run into the hideout. This has sometimes gotten me detected by the PMCs. Regardless of which way you take, I would argue that scenes like this are great examples of MGS4's stealth identity, or at least its potential stealth identity, where there's a huge saturation of enemy sense boxes, or senses in general, however we qualify them, but with lower attentiveness due to their focus being elsewhere, all of this happening within an event rather than a recurring patrol pattern. Enemies don't have a return path. They show up and perform a set of movements and or actions and then stay that way. This given event is somewhat well designed, but there's a lot of empty space in the bottom right corner here. And unfortunately, because you start on the opposite side of this giant building, it means there's a significant portion of your maneuvers that aren't actually interacting with the enemy. In fact, almost half don't interact with the enemy or avoid enemy senses. The next two parts are stupid. You basically just walk forward through the hideout in the first part, and in the second part, you're doing stupid platforming. Even worse is they are broken up by a cutscene. If anything, you should just cut straight to meeting with Drebin once you enter the hideout, and once you exit the hideout, cut to the scene where the militant encounters Johnny. The most insulting, disgusting, revolting part is the platforming. The reason is that platforming demands a completely different form of traversal design than stealth does, unless designed in tandem, and that is clearly not the case here. You're basically walking from one end of the map to the other, but you're pressing triangle once or twice. Old Snake even auto-ducks now. It doesn't make sense. Once you're back on the street, you have to make it through some small skirmishes to meet your contact on the other side of the map. Keep the disguise on, go up the ladder to the right, move across the balcony to the mortar, equip your octo camo, then drop down and get on the other side of this car. Shimmy through here and make your way through the alley until you get to this shootout. You'll have to use your Mosin to take out these snipers, but maybe if you rolled by, they might not notice. I opted to use the Mosin anyway, since avoiding both the resistance and PMCs would be harder than just stopping a moment to take out a few of these dudes. You can roll by these guys. In hindsight, I was wasting my time trying to tranquilize them. But this is, in fact, where rolling really clicked with me. This next part is basically set up for you to roll through. 2 firing lines and a small dip in the terrain right along the street between them. Come on, it's built to roll. I got this maneuver right first try as well. The problem with this map segment is that there's too much unused or irrelevant space again. That entire beginning street has little use since taking the far side is so inefficient. And then that encounter down the alley beyond the car, I don't know what's going on there since you can just shimmy down into the other route. You're forced to ascend the building you get into, the only obstacle being these mines placed everywhere which can be shot and destroyed very easily. It's a pointless section. It should just be a cutscene. You shouldn't need to actually walk up the building. There's no reason to. The Frog Soldiers boss fight is actually pretty good. The worst part is the near force damage you take at the beginning, but it's a really great use of the cover shooting mechanics in a boss fight. The AI on both sides is balanced well. Your allies are actually competent, but they can die if you just try and do nothing and make them do all the work. This is where we get to the issue with item and weapon balancing. Now, I won't count the fact that I stacked recovery items in my inventory, since those are counted against you anyways. You're expected to not use them. But since I brought that up, why are you allowed to use recovery items in Extreme? It would make more sense to just not have instant recovery on this difficulty. Although I imagine the reason they did keep them in is because that would mean giving Old Snake a cigarette in a corner every 10 minutes of gameplay, which would suck. And furthermore, it would mean you waiting for like 15 minutes for your health to fully recharge too. The real problem is that since there are so few non-lethal weapons, and you're forced to go non-lethal on all confrontations, besides the beast modes of the Snakehound unit, your only options are really the 22 and the solar gun. The solar gun itself is somewhat balanced since it trades a charge time for a one-hit KO, and on top of that isn't silent, so you can't be spamming it everywhere during the stealth sections. Technically, you can vary its rate of fire, but only the second stage and full charge do any real damage. The shotguns are mostly useless outside of a few niche utilities, since their effective range is so low, and they utilize the same ammo pool. And on top of that, they don't even do that much damage. The Mosin, on the other hand, is more accurate, but even in third person, the bolt action makes it too slow, and the one-hit KO isn't a good trade-off for how low your reserves are. So fully non-lethal confrontations like this have you restricted to basically 2 guns, and maybe the Mosin if you're really desperate. That is 2 out of 70. And I mean all weapons, okay? Because you should balance your game around using all of the tools you provide to the player. As for the battle itself, it's an issue that more of the fight doesn't take place in sections like the restaurant or kitchen. Otherwise, it's just you trading shots across a giant chasm. The first floor is the worst since you're only shooting like 2 enemies and only have this small bar to move behind. The roof is slightly better, but still bad since you're only shooting from one place. The third floor is the best, like I said, since you move more and among different environments, and fire from more than one position since the frogs quickly enter your side of the building. The frogs are more dangerous than PMC regulars too, so with the map designed as it is, it's a better than average fight. Everything after it, besides the cutscenes, I suppose, should have been removed. It doesn't need to be in here because there's no gameplay happening. This section is pretty cool. The Resistance brings in some armor and you can follow behind it, tranquilizing enemies. Kind of neat. The problem is if you run up, move right, take out this guy and then this guy, then just follow behind them gradually, you don't need to do much work. There needs to be much more vicious fighting between these two factions such that it's actually relevant whether you, the player, interact with them or not. As it is, the whole event basically plays out the same if you aren't there, or at least that's how it would seem to. It needed to be much more difficult. You get a cutscene with the Snakehound unit and then load into the final map sequence before the end of the act. This part on the end of the street near the rubble with all the dead bodies, just remove that. You should start on this side of the wall here. Tranquilize these guys, tranquilize these 2 guys, roll over here, tranquilize these 2 guys, then roll through the courtyard. There's a few guys inside whose sightlines I couldn't see. I waited until it was safe, dropped this guy, then rolled on in. Although for the last few feet, you can just walk since you're in no danger. Nonetheless, you're beginning to see the pattern with how movement works and how effective rolling is. The roll everywhere effect is real, and it's a problem that rolling everywhere is more consistent to some degree than calculated crouch walking. Onto Solid Sun, where Old Snake is dropped into South America. On this cliffside, it is very easy to get detected. There is a concentration of 3 PMC dudes in the middle holding Resistance members hostage, and 3 guys in and around the houses. This is a nice level, but the AI of the Resistance members is questionable, since sometimes they'll see you and consider you a friend, and sometimes they'll attack you for no reason. My strat was to just tranquilize as many as I could from this hill before moving down towards the next section. And that right there is the problem with this whole map. The hill, having a vantage point for the enemy to see you if you aren't stealthy enough, is a nice way to challenge the player, but since this game is a shooter that lets you move and aim, it works both ways. You can take out virtually everyone from here. It's better ascending the next hill since you're forced to move forward and then sweep across it by the large wall here. But if you're in a caution state, the PMC troops will start descending the hill and lining up in front of you, and you can just sleep them before interacting. Once you take out some of the reinforcements, you can move up and on to the next stage. Is this map good? A huge amount of space isn't used, so no. The openness of the map isn't good for it, and the arrangement of the enemies in the houses is an interesting idea, but there's no incentive to enter the houses. If the resistance members start fighting back, then these guys exit the houses anyways. The second hill is better. The enemy count creates some more intersection of sight lines, but I'm convinced that PMCs on Extreme don't actually have the acuteness of perception required to actually make the game extreme in its difficulty. Second of all, the resistance does literally nothing if you free them. They're a non-factor, even in distracting the enemy, because the position of their distraction is literally the same way you have to enter the hill. So what's the point of that? What's the significance of that change? The good thing about forcing the player to ascend a hill with ledges he has to step up onto is that you're prevented from rolling the whole way and have to vary movement modes as well as make more significant choices with shooting. The next part is pretty short and inconsequential. You can prone through this tunnel, pick up anesthetic rounds on the way, and then just roll over to the next loading screen. Another map that's too large. There's no reason for you to interact with 90% of it. Without the player being forced to cross the map and encounter the enemy, there's no challenge or point to the level. Now it's daytime and you load in alongside some resistance fighters approaching an enemy base. This map also has two routes, one towards the base and one alongside it, up the hill to your right. The player doesn't encounter the enemy right after entry. You have to traverse way too much ground before that happens. Even up the hill, you still have some stupid platforming to do, although you can just walk up. This hill is a great example of how rolling everywhere is the lowest effort, highest efficiency approach for stealth maneuvering. The PMCs are stationed at or close to each of the dirt mounds here, and the best way to clear the angles they're watching is to roll around them facing their direction. Unfortunately, you don't have to interact with all of them. The sniper crew watching the other approach doesn't even look back. Although, it's kind of obvious that the guys you just slept were their support, so it makes some sense that you can ignore them. Once you've cleared the hill, you can roll back down behind this chain link fence. The final section is clearing the back of the base. Around the lumber stacks, there's only one enemy you might need to tranquilize. The resistance members take care of the rest. I played it safe with more rolling, but you could probably just walk up to Drebin's APC to finish the level. As for rolling being so low effort and high efficiency, they clearly recognize this with barrel rolling, because the barrel roll not only protects you from damage, but can also knock down enemies, but had trouble recognizing this for regular rolling. That regular rolling is so good, they definitely needed to do something either in level design or with some other kind of punishment for overusing rolling. The only real punishment is how much time it can take, but if you were to really find out which parts you didn't need to roll, then I'm sure it would be even more efficient. Old Snake's next task is to make his way down this road. 2 PMCs are approaching right as you load in, and they can be slept easily with your 22, after which you can either use your Mosin or solar gun to take out the snipers behind them. 2 more PMCs approach, you can also take them out easily, and then get the next loading screen. I genuinely can't believe there's a loading screen between these 2 sections, by the way. It's idiotic how often they interrupt your game. I discovered something cool using the solar gun in this part, that when you KO a PMC with it here, they sometimes drop 22 rounds, meaning you can apply the two guns in tandem, alternating the 22 at close range and the solar gun at medium to long range. This dynamic of changing your firearm at one range or another is unfortunately tied to inventory, but it's still unique to the shooter mechanics here and a good development within them. It's unfortunate the levels and enemy placement and enemy design don't utilize it more. There's a helicopter overhead and PMCs watching the road. Take them out and honestly just ignore the helicopter. I don't know why it's here. As far as I can tell, it can't detect you. It's just there to kill you faster if you get an alert. In which case, everything kills you fast if you get an alert. So why not just remove it? Move up to this barbed wire and wait for the APC to move down the road. With the APC gone, the road itself, for some reason, is a massive blind spot for the enemy. There's no one watching it. All it takes to get to the next level is tranquilizing this one guy and then another at the very end. That's it. The rest is traversal. The chopper needs to be actually watching the player if it's present overhead. I can't believe I'm saying this twice, that a giant helicopter with a minigun might actually have to kill the player to, justify its presence in the level. In terms of layout, this map is better than the previous, but unlike the previous, which was just shooting from one angle, it has an abundance of unused space because the player's enforced to clear the enemies, and thus a lot of potential traversal is wasted. You walk up to some resistance fighters attempting an ambush. This environment is slightly broken up by big rocks and dirt mounds and some micro terrain. Since the resistance is getting all the attention and it's a big map, you can kind of squeeze through along the border and take out the PMC troopers from the sidelines. It was around this time that I was really feeling the effects of the Psyche system. So once I got inside the palace, I decided to take a break and see how long it actually takes for you to fully recover from a stress-induced crash. It took about 1 minute and 23 seconds, and that's just to get to 0 stress. It would take even longer to get to max stamina or Psyche or whatever. There had to be at least one person who spoke up and said this was awful and bad for the game. From my chilling zone, I ascended the staircase and over the carcasses of the resistance members as a second wave followed. You can let these guys duke it out as you KO the PMCs with your solar gun undetected. I think you're beginning to notice a pattern here. Since firefights generally aren't dynamic, it's just a prescribed end that happens over and over, or an event that happens once and then the event is resolved. The AI of each side isn't programmed to respond to stimuli from an undetected player. Imagine if the PMC side noticed they were being shot at from their flank but couldn't identify the shooter. That happens in some cases, but not all, and not in this one. Do resistance fighters take different routes or use different strategies if they know you're here, compared to if you went undetected by both sides? Questions seem unconsidered by the developers, and they definitely shouldn't have been. Inside the house, there are 2 troopers descending the stairs, but they go down easily, and even the second guy can't seem to see you even after you knock down his friend right in front of him. Then there's just a little bit more walking, drop down in here and move forward, and then you fight Laughing Octopus. You can just cut out all of this pointless traversal. It's better to get a cutscene the moment you knock out the stair guys. Technically, though, you're not onto Octopus yet. You need to defeat a cadre of frogs first. The layout of Naomi's lab presents a problem in recreating the kind of firefight old Snake got into at Advent Palace, because it's not entirely interconnected through angles. There are huge obstructions that you can't shoot around, and thus the best way to defeat the first wave of frogs is to just peek them outside the rooms. Peeking is something you'll be doing with Laughing Octopus too, but the effectiveness of it is a symptom of the cover mechanics being poorly implemented in the map. If there were fewer full body obstructions, or certain calibers were permitted to penetrate weak surfaces, then there would be need for the player to make a choice of cover, but here that isn't the case. Even with the 22 you could do this. It's just better to use the solar gun first since its ammo can be replenished more easily when the fight is over. It's just a shame Octopus and her goons couldn't get a better map. The fight proper starts with you being right in front of Octopus, and the best course of action from there is to take cover as she's already pulling out her gun, then fire back as she draws. This is what you're going to do until she drops down and lets loose those little floating bomblets. I don't know what they're actually called. You can defeat these with a rocket launcher. I didn't know that you can defeat the beast mode of each boss lethally, by the way, and still get the non-lethal completion on the beauty mode. So that's why I was using the Mosin here. It's the best way to reliably damage Octopus since you can strafe with it. It does the most damage of any non-lethal, and you can zoom in on Octopus's head when she's doing her hiding phase, which is next. This phase is the worst part of the fight. You're tasked with doing a little scavenger hunt every time with no challenge to it besides doing it faster for score's sake. She doesn't counterattack if you fail to find her, and she doesn't change locations if you're too slow. But even the fact that you have to find her is in itself bad design. Even within the fight, she disguises herself in other more creative and constructive, well-designed ways, but these ways don't resolve the real underlying problem, only the more apparent ones like extending the fight for too long. The underlying problem is that neither disguise phases, the hiding or non-hiding one, actually get you to move inside the building. You're still playing on the outside. Only like 2 of these disguises are actually inside. That's not all, though. Basically, the middle 2 bars of her stamina are not spent fighting you. They're spent hiding. It's spent on you looking for her to shoot her. Her unsuited form is basically not a boss. None of the Snakehound beauty modes are bosses at all. I don't know why they're not cutscenes. I don't get it. I don't understand the thought process behind that. Laughing Octopus would have been a good boss if she made you use the whole map and didn't let you easily bait her attacks to peek her and spent more of the fight actually fighting you. After Laughing Octopus, you're thrown back into the jungle to search for Naomi. Although it's not an actual search like Zadornov, your target isn't a person, you're just moving to a hidden exit. There's no enemy interaction until you get to the bridge where you have to duck down or roll so the guy down the river doesn't notice you. There is one guy in this fork. He's easy to take out since he's at medium range. Then take the path on the far right, slowly. Do the same with this sniper here. Then take the middle path, roll around this corner, and drop the patrol. Are you noticing a pattern? Again, 1 guy per clearing, then only 1 out of the 3 paths goes anywhere. On a first playthrough, it makes a difference, but the significance of the choice goes down drastically, practically to 0, even on a continue. That's bad design. You've created a feature whose meaning depreciates as a function of familiarity, of player input. It forces the player to watch a piece of the game become more worthless forever as they play it. It will never be replenished like a ration or other resource like ammo. I took the path where 2 frogs are hiding behind the trees. The first you can take out with the solar gun. The second one, maybe if you get a good angle with the solar gun you can hit, but it's probably too close. I decided to use the barrel to knock her out. You can do this with the next 2 frogs. Continue slow down the dirt path. Take out this guy behind a tree stump who won't see you even if he turns and looks right at you. Here, by the way, is one of the few times you'll purposely take a bad path just to get a ration. Although taking this path means you can avoid being in the way of an oncoming frog team, so I guess there is some significance to it. I'm not sure if they get reinforced regardless of whether you get a caution or alert or not. I screwed up here, by the way, and got detected coming over this hill. I panicked, but noticing how little damage the solar gun did with 0 charge, I made the decision to just spam it and see how long it took to get a KO. It did take a great deal of shots. It also begs the question, why do the frogs not freaking jump on you the moment you get detected? The APC ride is an action section. It starts with Drebin driving through the gate of Naomi's house and forcing you to take out some powered suits. This enemy type never appears again, by the way. Also, the game is going to slow down a ton if you don't put your solid eye into thermal mode. There's only 2 powered suits and they don't really do anything. The same goes for the horde of geckos that stop you next. There's not really much threat from these guys, at least if you're paying even a little bit of attention to them. Furthermore, the deranged PMCs don't threaten you either, so the geckos don't attack you and the little guys don't throw you off the ride. What's the point of the chase then? I should seriously be dying more than once from this. In fact, the only reason I died the first time on my second playthrough was because I didn't use the solid eye to shoot the weak points on each gecko. If you do that, they don't even start shooting back. Then the chase comes to a halt when you have to shoot these 2 doors for about 30 seconds straight each. This is just idiotic. There is an explanation for why this is bad. In this case, it's so obvious that it would be a waste of breath for me to tell you it. Everyone knows better. Everyone knows this sucks. Also, what's the deal with enemy armor exploding instantly when you shoot it? It's not making the chase any harder, and neither do the geckos that follow you in the last leg. The run through the market is exactly that. You run through it, bait out the sweep from the gecko, then move on. They really could have designed this chase better. In fact, the 2 chases in the game both have a problem when played non-lethally, being that you have no fully automatic non-lethal. And the only one close to that is your solar gun, which, unlike every other gun during the chase sequences, does not have infinite ammo. However, the lethal weapon, your turret, doesn't adjust aim fast enough to hit targets while the APC is moving, much less targets that are moving themselves and in different directions than Drebin. So now both prescribed methods for enemy defeat have a fundamental flaw in their use. Not good. The next section is the worst part of the game. The worst part of the entire game. 3 times for the 3rd act, it is the worst part of the entire game, and without question, the worst part of the entire franchise. It's a tailing escort combination mission, and I mean, people just love those, right? So you already know how good this is going to be, where you follow a resistance member through the Czech Republic during a PMC imposed curfew. If the resistance fighter sees you, he freaks out and shoots you. So you have to wear beauty face camo. If the PMCs see you, they set off an alert and then they shoot you. So you have to wear beauty face camo. If you get detected by the PMCs in the second part of the map that the resistance member walks into, they set off an alert regardless. And then that alert causes the resistance guy to freak out and shoot you anyways. So the whole face camo thing only works for the first and last parts. If you die or lose the target, you have to die or reset the whole console to load a save. Continues don't reset the resistance fighter's spawn, so you have to wait for a minute for the signal finder item to acquire the area that the resistance dude spawns in. Then you have to wait to go there and search for him. If you mess up one part, any one part of his route, he changes it completely. And I know this because I messed up one and then recovered, and he went to a completely different part of the map as he usually does. He circles back twice if you mess up even a little bit. It's awful. This is horrible. It's agonizing to play. You also can't control him fully. Like Emma, it's only semi-interactive on the player's part, so it's not like there are resistance fighters around the map going to the hideout on their own, find one of them and follow them there. No, there is one guy who spawns in when you trigger his spawn that you have to follow, and his movement is triggered by your proximity. If you run too far ahead, he stops moving. And if you lose him or get too far behind, he might just randomly despawn. The devs made sure to make the wrong choice in every single part of this level. It is infuriating. And it doesn't stop there because the resistance fighter walks everywhere he goes. He doesn't run or power walk. He strolls everywhere. So start by putting your stuff on, then move forward, and of course get a cutscene because everyone loves cutscenes. Follow him down the street, take this staircase, and then take out these 2 characters. Did I mention that he stops for 15 seconds anytime he sees the results of your work? It just keeps getting better and better, right? take out the two guys at this arch, then over here, then over here. I can't believe I'm recounting all this non-gameplay for you. I'd really rather just skip it. In fact, you can skip ahead if you don't care about this part. It doesn't matter. Follow him at a walking pace into the northeast sector. The square or parking lot or whatever this part of the city is called in Europe has a ton of bad guys in it. So make sure to knock them down quick, or at least this one, to get their attention off you. Make a save at each sector too, so you don't have to redo all this crap. As the dude rounds the corner, take out the fire team in the street and follow him from above. And then he's going to hit up the Midtown North sector and put on his disguise. After this, it's smooth sailing. You don't have to do anything except follow him, which is exactly the problem. The only tolerable part of this opening is when you do nothing. It's almost like the first part was some kind of MK Ultra conditioning to make you accept the forced walking do nothing that comes after, since it's like a moment of lucidity right after excruciating pain. So just follow him around the street until he goes into Big Mama's House 2 starring Martin Lawrence. This is why I used the stealth camo the second time around, and I'm sure if you've experienced it yourself, you wouldn't blame me. Here is the second chase in the game. It's better than the first, that's for sure. It's actually difficult, but this is where a lot of the issues with the balancing come out. For some reason, you're only allowed to use certain guns, restricted to one-handed weapons. I guess because Old Snake needs to hang on to his mom while she controls the motorcycle. In Phase 1, it doesn't matter because you only have these geckos to deal with, so you can just use the grenade launcher. In the second part, this is more of a problem, since if you remember, the solar gun is the only weapon here without infinite ammo, but it's so much less effective in the Europe chase because of how fast you're moving. You can't reliably readjust on targets since the projectiles are so slow, so you have to save it for the frogs which jump on the van. Then, when she comes to a halt the first and second time, you can switch to the 22. Or you can just use the solar gun the whole time for soldiers and shoot a little bit more sparingly than I did. After you cross the bridge and Raging Raven appears, you can break out the Patriot finally, and getting to use the Patriot one-handed on the back of a motorcycle is awesome. And it's a cool dynamic to have the drones require lethal and then the ground troops require non-lethal. So you switch Patriot, take out the drones, 22 for the frogs, back and forth, so on. Then Big Mama will crash and you'll fight Raging Raven. This chase, like I said, is better than the first by a little bit, since it has the same problems, but since it has the same problems to a lesser degree, although they're more pervasive, since Old Snake, no matter what, has his view adjustment too slow by default to effectively aim at targets while moving at this speed. I'm not saying it's impossible, I'm saying the level is built in some places, especially when enemies are completely static and you're moving at top speed, where it doesn't really seem consistent with the weapon design. Raging Raven is a really easy and short boss if you bring your railgun. A fully charged railgun shot, I'm pretty sure, kills her beast mode instantly. It's almost not a fight at all. The UAVs, the wing drone things, they don't hit you, and they don't even try. Once they get hit, they don't move any faster. They don't counterattack. They're non-factors. Raven herself, if you get a lucky charge on her, dies instantly. However, I won't say that it's awful or a nothing fight, since Raven is at least always present and always attacking or attempting to kill you. It is better at least to have a boss fight be too short due to an overpowered weapon than to have it run too long by preventing the player from using his own weapons. The overuse of the margins of the map problem is also present here because you're on a tower and the only way to hit Raven is from the balcony. Yes, you technically can shoot through the windows, but generally you're going to be out on the balcony. However, because Raven and her UAVs all attack you with explosives, you're incentivized to jump through the windows to save yourself from their attacks, which is a good way to get you to use more of the map. Although the lower sections of the tower don't really factor into it, so there's still a massive part of the map that goes unused. Act 4 drops off Old Snake in Shadow Moses. The game does this stupid thing where you have to beat the gate map from the original Metal Gear Solid. You can see your console spinning up its PS1 backwards compatibility because it turns off the input. I already reviewed this level. Yes, I checked if it's the same as the original. The only serious difference is that there's no SOCOM in the truck. None of your pickups here carry over, by the way, so there's no reason for it to be here. When you finally get to the real present-time Shadow Moses, you're in a field north of the gate with some ammo boxes. And that's it. No rations unless I miss something. This part of the level should not be here. You should start here with the gecko searching for you. Introducing new enemy types for the normal stealth section seems too little too late, and you didn't even make them tough either. A fully charged railgun shot insta-kills them. Go towards the Shadow Moses gates and get those chaff grenades. Chaff grenades are probably the most useful resource in the game proportional to how much they drop, so make sure to get these ones here. Drop a chaff and roll through the tank hangar, then snipe the 2 geckos outside with your railgun. I can't help but get the ominous haunting feeling that Kojima wanted to generate nostalgia for the original Shadow Moses by making the player use chaff on the highest difficulty, but that's not relevant to the gameplay itself, so we'll continue. Cross the snowfield and crawl into the warhead hangar, then go all the way downstairs to Otacon's office and back out through the tunnel again. Look at how much unchallenged movement the player is doing. This is a waste of space. Couldn't we just make it a skippable cutscene or something like that? Pre-charge your railgun as you round this corner and drop the gecko as it comes down. Take the elevator up and do the little gate thing. Take out the gecko and the event will finish early. Before you start the Crying Wolf battle, make sure to get the 7.62 anesthetic rounds. This is the only drop of this kind I ever came upon in the entire game, so if you want to use the Mosin later, pick these up. Crying Wolf is either over instantly or she takes forever. There is no in between. Basically, the strat is to take out some of the frogs so you can stealthily move over to the back of the map and then stun lock Crying Wolf until she dies. Your route will change depending on the spawn you get for Crying Wolf. Quite sure if she starts at the same place and moves based on whether she can see you and shoot you, or whether she has a randomized spawn at the back of the map that you just have to account for. I went left, took out 2 frogs, snuck up on her, fired once, then set it to stun and just kept firing in the hopes that would end her. Unfortunately, that didn't work. It left her at 3%, running all over the place. I learned from a previous playthrough that you can knock her down on a charge if you pull out the Patriot, but neglected to notice how this did a small amount of stamina damage too. I inadvertently ended the fight with it. Although this makes me wonder if I could hypothetically one-shot Wolf with the railgun, as I did with Raven. Wolf forces you to traverse a lot more ground and not unimpeded as well because you're fighting both the frogs and her sniping. And she also threatens you before and after she detects you with both sniping and mauling. Although, to be honest, it would be better if mauling just instantly killed you, or at least prevented you from opening your item menu while you are getting attacked. That's just a possible improvement, but the boss otherwise is pretty good. Positioning and the fact that she's hiding from you and threatening you at the same time means that she's making you use the entire map, not to mention that the frogs are assisting in that as well. I checked the map afterwards for more gear and then moved on to the boiler room. These scarab enemies in the second half of the Shadow Moses stealth sections are the most stupid and annoying enemy. There's no way to effectively deal with more than a few of them except with a chaff grenade. I took the catwalks over to the elevator and then dropped down, but I was perhaps a little too loud and had to spam the button to take me downstairs. This next section is actually, in hindsight, really cool. It's one of the only times you have the incentive to use a silence lethal, although technically you could have done it with the previous section, since the silence lethals like the M4 can take out scarabs without triggering an alert. I would commend the design of the scarab. or dwarf gecko as it's called, itself, if it were used as a moving security camera, as they are here, more often than hordes of scarabs were just turned into giant walls of death that you're forced to pour rounds on during an alert. Speaking of a giant horde of enemies, the next time you kill a gecko in the entrance to Rex's lair, they spawn indefinitely out of these holes. Indefinitely. How contrary is it to the core design of Metal Gear to have an indefinitely spawning enemy? And especially one that would otherwise surely kill you if it doesn't face a constant hail of bullets from the Patriot. Trust me, I tried literally every other weapon, and the only effective ones were the Patriot and Chaff. Even non-stop shooting with the grenade launcher and railgun doesn't work, because scarabs just gang up on you in the time it takes to reload. Either way, this section is possible in full stealth, as it's supposed to be played that way. Screwed that up here and had to shoot a ton of these little guys before I could move on to the Vamp boss fight, if it can even be called a fight at all. You shoot him in the head with a solar gun, grab him, and inject him with the syringe. Even if there was some intricate or super deep design, it wouldn't matter because there's a get out of jail free card. And even worse is that it's a gimmicky joke exploit. Ha ha ha, the sun pistol instantly knocks out the vampire. Wow, that is so funny, Kojima. Way to ruin your own boss fight for a joke that isn't even funny. The gecko jump in, and you're put in a split-screen shooting gallery while Raiden battles the now mortal Vamp. This is an interesting and much less intrusive way for Kojima to execute his idea of merging cinema with video gaming, and the way it's split in real time reinforces my hypothesis that he watched and loved 24. That's really just tangential. Is the shootout here well designed? Somewhat, not that great. The gecko do get down to business to try and blow up your spot, and their high spawn number forces you sometimes to pick between spamming low power shots and calculating high power ones. That dynamic, however, isn't really explored because the geckos don't saturate the area enough, nor do the gun geckos and suicide geckos have different enough approaches for it to matter. Old Snake and Raiden hop into Metal Gear Rex, and now you've got to pilot it and make your escape. Just keep scooting forward. That's it. It's a completely pointless section. One of the most potentially awesome parts of the game takes place entirely in a hallway where you hold forward and spam X. Crazy fumble. The Rex and Ray fight is a fumble too, since not only are you still locked into this very awkward gimmick control system, your weapons are also unbalanced. Look at how little damage it does to kick Ray in the face, stomp on it, and cut him up with a laser, and compare it to some normal anti-tank missiles.
Anti-tank missiles do more damage than a 1,200,000+ pound kick? Are you kidding me?
The strat for this fight is to not use anything except your anti-tank missiles, and to use anything else to either stun Ray or defend yourself against it, and to move as little as possible while you do all this. So the solution to the fight is to use none of the unique tools given to the player for this moment, and this moment alone. Yeah, that's really good design for sure. Old Snake and his crew jump onto Outer Haven and get separated. You start on one end of the deck, and your objective is on the opposite side of the map. Frogs are everywhere and constantly moving. According to my observations, their movements are a single route that doesn't repeat. I tried a few other routes on my own and pretty much immediately decided on one I had seen in a challenge run. Crouch walk over to this corner, drop and roll out into the open, wait till this crew disperses, roll all the way down to this corner, then roll to this spot, drop this frog, roll again down this corridor, proceed towards these crates, shimmy through this gap, re-index your camo, then take out the next two frogs. Turn 90 degrees to your left and roll, drop another frog fire team, and keep rolling all the way over here. A gecko spawn will trigger. The gecko will rotate its position out with another. Stay still, and when the second gecko turns around, move towards the door. I think I accidentally got someone's attention because just as I get the door open and enter, I got an alert. Maybe this whole route is messed up, but it's more likely I took 1 second too long on one or all of the last 3 maneuvers. It'd be really cool if you're just given a game over if you fail to reach your objective completely undetected. That'd be crazy. Imagine a game having that feature. Besides reinforcing my complaint about the lack of GOID, the level being event-based but with only one side is a good variation on the original concept in Act 1 and 2. But it's a shame that each event is only triggered by the player and isn't on an independent timer, because otherwise there's no gameplay incentive, only a scoring incentive to go faster and be more efficient with your movements. The player being the event trigger instead of a clock is part of why rolling is so effective, because any triggered event, regardless of the player's orientation to it, will always be less likely to cause an alert if the player is prone and has his camo re-index as the result of a roll. The frogs and gecko are also much more formidable enemies than PMCs, but the way their spawns are set up, they don't move around the map enough to threaten the player unless you're standing up straight in one of the wide open spaces. My other complaint, which is sort of personal or subjective, but not really, is that this is the only stealth section in all of Outer Haven. The next battle is a shootout with the frog forces. The problem here is that the cover on this map is designed very poorly. Though you would think before gameplay that the computer terminals would provide sufficient cover and that the player and the frogs would move around those, popping up to shoot at each other, that is not the case, because the frogs constantly push your position and move as individuals, not as groups. The terminals do not provide sufficient environmental defense. Instead, you're pushed to the outside of the room, hiding behind the columns, peeking intermittently. This is especially true once the frogs on the second floor spawn in, as the terminals provide even less defense from them. The entire fight is played out on the margins of the map. 75% of it, at least, isn't used. This is the same problem as the Advent Palace battle, to an even worse degree, since you can actually stand in the middle of the map, yet the spawns and fighting AI of the enemy are designed to make sure you don't, for some reason. As for effective strategies, you honestly just have to keep peeking from the columns. The solar gun that I used operates counter to the cover system, since you can't charge from behind cover while not aiming, but aiming obviously exposes you from behind cover. The attaching to cover mechanic goes almost completely unused till the second wave. And even in the second wave, it's still not used that much. The Screaming Mantis battle doesn't have the same problems. You do use more of the map, since Screaming Mantis is always moving, once you hit her first doll, at least, and you are occasionally forced to return to the center to save Meryl. What's crazy is that the exact strategy I outlined would improve the Twin Snakes version of Psycho Mantis is actually used here by Screaming Mantis. Off one of the core game mechanics, he could use telepathically controlled objects to block your shots, throw you off, or force you to move around more. This would also be a different and superior means of disorientation than the stupid black screen gimmick. Since you can always shoot, and your goal is to make her drop her mantis doll to use it against her, she uses her telekinesis to put bodies, objects, in the path of your bullets to protect her weak spots. I've never played this game before, by the way, nor did I ever watch gameplay of it due to prior disinterest, but damn, okay? Don't play with me. Yes, it's a negative, so I can't prove I've never played it before now, and likewise, the solution is kind of obvious given how Psycho Mantis used chairs, but it's not the exact same, because his chairs circled him. They didn't block your bullets as a function of your aim. Screaming Mantis constantly reorients in order to face you. I mean, that's just cool. That's good. That's improvement. Thankfully, the controller port gimmick isn't here. You're supposed to use the syringe for everything instead. I can appreciate this is meritorious somewhat, on the grounds that it forces the player to be more defensive and evasive and swap between the two. On both offense and defense, you're using the movement and shooting mechanics, but this boss fight neglects to use the cover system almost completely. Pretty much the same as the frogs. Another error I found is that in order to equip the Mantis doll to defeat her, you have to pause the game and get it out from the weaponry menu. Even if you just picked it up. It should auto-equip, okay, to your wheel. Not your selection, but just on pickup. Also, I did play this fight slightly suboptimally. Apparently, the V-ring ammo from any shotgun weapon is way more efficient than holding down fire with the Patriot, but in the end, it doesn't particularly matter. As with all the other Snakehound bosses, the beauty phase is pointless. Old Snake is now in the final stretch, and this part before the microwave hallway has you just walk straight forward. Why is this in the game? Do I have to say that unimpeded traversal is bad design again? The little scarabs they designed to stop you hardly do anything either. You can just roll through them. I saved Shaft for this section, but apparently it was not required. This is the boss extreme, by the way. Then the microwave section, it's awful. Not as bad as Act 3, Section 1, but close. Perhaps the second worst. It involves holding forward and then spamming triangle. Really great gameplay, dude. You couldn't have made this a cutscene. Kojima has a cutscene playing above it, but couldn't stand to just cut it in, and instead we have a stupid button spamming section. This part sucks, dude. I don't have any other way to put it. It sucks. The Liquid Ocelot boss fight is utter garbage. Let's answer the question of what its purpose is. It is made to call back to the climactic Liquid Snake close quarters combat battle, right? Well, why does it use a completely different control scheme? Every part of this boss battle is mechanically alien to the entirety of the franchise. Peace Walker and the 5 series do not have CQC with this control scheme. Neither does any prior game. If it was meant to be nostalgic, why isn't it? So never mind the fact that the control scheme is not only bizarre in itself and uses none of the skills you spent the past few hours of gameplay developing, but the fight is apparently just as cruel to the player as the escape ride in MGS1 and the Twin Snakes, in that it has a ton of practically unavoidable damage backloaded into the final section of the fight. Remember how the Rex versus Ray fight balanced your moves such that only one of them did any significant measure of damage? Liquid Ocelot does the same thing. Due to this, the player's most efficient available approach is to bait silly moves, abuse iframes, and loop attacks whenever possible. Don't forget the unskippable cutscenes and deprivation of control. Every subsequent phase in the game comes with a mandatory cutscene. Even worse, the first time you get knocked down, and it doesn't matter what phase it happens in, you are forced to listen to Ocelot say "Snake" and wait about 3 seconds before you're allowed to stand back up. There is zero significance of this to gameplay. It doesn't punish the player within the mechanics of the game, nor does it relate to any other part of the unique control scheme here. What does it do except waste my time? It would be better to just have him one-hit KO you, okay? The strategy for the first phase, get him in the corner and loop attacks until you reach the next phase. In this phase is even easier in concept, but the timing is occasionally tricky. Basically, hold guard to bait out the big punch attack, dodge, close ground, and hit him with your basic string, then do it over and over until you enter the second to last phase. This phase is where the fight gets ridiculously stupid. Instead of rebalancing the fight to make it actually dangerous, they just threw in a ton of practically unavoidable damage to reduce the player's health before the final phase. Did I mention that Ocelot's health regenerates with each subsequent phase? So instead of just giving him a larger health bar and actually communicating to the player how much of his health is left, no, they have him regenerate. Okay, that is awful design. So in the final phase, Ocelot starts grabbing and throwing you out of nowhere. He doesn't telegraph the move, nor does he do it on a tempo, so there's zero way for you to avoid this stupid knockdown, besides spamming triangle the moment the cutscene starts. Not only this, but Ocelot blocks everything and splices in random punch parries. In fact, I think he uses this headbutt as a punch parry occasionally. If you block, he'll also go to the headbutt. There's basically no reliable way to do this perfectly. If you attack, he does damage to you because he can cancel your attacks. He can cancel through your attacks and his own hit stun, by the way. So if you attack, he does damage to you. If you block, he does damage to you. If you try and dodge, he'll grab you and do damage to you. There's no practical way on the player's part to reliably avoid getting damage. It's awful. Basically, you just have to wing it and hope you retain enough health for the final phase, wherein you and Ocelot trade punches with some modicum of control over your movements. Take a few steps forward and punch, and then punch, and keep doing it. Yes, this is an actual part of the fight. Yes, your health bar is still active. Yes, both health bars are invisible for no reason. Yes, you can die during this glorified QuickTime event. Yes, you have to start over from the beginning if that happens. This last part is the part most like MGS1 because all the force damage means that you basically need to do really well in the first and second parts and then just hope that you can survive the last one. So it's mathematically almost impossible and humanly not possible to actually complete this fight perfectly. This is the worst fight in the game. That's it. That's the game. That is the entire franchise I just played. Crazy to think about. Since the game is already broken up into acts, we'll rank it that way. And then in a 3-act structure to be consistent with how previous games were appraised. With the 5 acts, I'd go from worst to best, 3, 5, 4, 2, 1. With 3 acts, I'd have to separate 1 as being from the beginning to Laughing Octopus, 2 would be from Laughing Octopus to Crying Wolf, and then 3 would be from Crying Wolf to the end. In such a case, I would say worst to best is 3, 2, 1. MGS4 doesn't have one perfect or even outright good act. 3's problem is the first section. 5 has Liquid Ocelot and a not so great shootout with the frogs. 4 has a ton of empty unused space. 1 has the same problem to a lesser degree, and 2 has that not so great chase sequence, but even then has more unused and empty space than 1. The first act, Liquid Sun, is the most concentrated in terms of enemy senses and overall gameplay molarity. The game as a whole maintains moderate molarity afterwards. There aren't many sections besides Liquid Ocelot and the escort mission where you're doing something completely off base of the fundamental gameplay design, thankfully. So the problem that MGS4 has overall is deeper than not sticking to its guns, pun intended, because even if it does stick to that design for the most part, the layout of the levels and the challenge of that layout isn't sufficient to really bring out the best use of the mechanics by the player. That's where the roll everywhere effect that I was talking about is so prominent. And it's prominent because the levels and enemies weren't designed well enough. As for the bosses, from worst to best, my ranking is Liquid Ocelot, Vamp, Laughing Octopus, Raging Raven, Frogs in Outer Haven, Rex vs. Ray, Frogs in the Middle East, Screaming Mantis, Crying Wolf. Liquid Ocelot is the worst by far. It's totally foreign to the game itself, and even if we rate it on its own design, it's bad. Really bad. Vamp and Laughing Octopus both have a fundamental flaw in length. Raging Raven as well, but it at least forces you to move more. There's an incentive on the player to be more active and to be a better shot as well than with Laughing Octopus and Vamp. Outer Haven Frogs and Ray, the encounter design is better there, but it doesn't force you to move nearly as much. So the net rating comes out better, but still not great, especially not given the fact that your incentive to use all the tools available to you isn't present in either of those fights. The Middle East Frogs make better use of the shooting mechanics in an encounter with multiple enemies. They make you use more of the map, but they're still in third because they don't make you use all of the map, and the map itself isn't designed that well. Screaming Mantis has multiple ways to get you to use all the space in the map, despite the syringe gimmick, and makes the player use the shooting mechanics more, and arguably in a better way than the frogs in the Middle East do. In fact, the enemy is using cover in this fight, so there's a different and more creative dynamic going on there. But Crying Wolf does both of those at the same time. There is a titanic gap between Crying Wolf and every other boss in the game, besides Screaming Mantis, really. In fact, even though you can hypothetically kill her roughly as fast as Raven, all the other elements of her fights make it overall more meritorious than everything else in the game. Her fight is practically an additional stealth level in its own right, and you can see a glimpse of the more seamless stealth action fusion Kojima wanted, where both use the exact same mechanics, and the difference between the stealth and action is the context and application of that single control set. This glimpse, though, is then snuffed out. It's obstructed because all the boss fights are way too easy. It has nothing to do with ammo reserves and balancing, which is really what I learned throughout the whole game. The fact that even having infinite ammo or having enough money to buy infinite ammo doesn't make a difference because the game is just too easy. These guys have a hard time finding you if you're actually using the shooting mechanics, and then once they find you, they don't actually kill you, which carries over to the bosses. They're all pushovers. This whole game feels like a pushover, and that lack of demand for the player's ability is a more pervasive error than even the poor level design after the first two acts. Even if a game lets you be detected, even if it lets you play out the failure state, it needs to be dangerous in every respect for the player. The aesthetic of Metal Gear Solid 4 is well developed but mired in contemporary trends, which were beneficial and injurious to it in different places. The best use of contemporary technology by far is the character models. Every model in this game is stupendous, and not in the sense that they were good for the time. No. I refuse to ever use such a term because it demeans any possible style used in the creation of perhaps anything, really. If they were merely products of the time, then everybody would have the same look as they did in 1, 2, and 3, but they don't. There is a style. There is a purposeful stylizing of the human figure and facial features in these models. There's a porcelain quality to the flesh, an odd gracefulness to the choreography that makes it appear ethereal. It is ethereal in a way. Everything seems to float around with a certain sense of grace. Even the very sharp and brutal actions such as CQC and whatnot, probably because of the purposeful slowdown they use in the cutscenes. Although Kojima does that in every game, it especially looks that way due to these models moving in that manner. It doesn't just go for the character modeling, but the visual design in general. The ethereal quality applies to the gecko and scarab designs, which are amazing. I wish I could draw up something as functional, sleek, and yet placeable within the context of the narrative as the gecko. Its characteristics are specific to Metal Gear Solid 4. It is representative of it in a way. It's also just sick on its own. It keeps the Rex head so you know where it's developed from, but the instrument and weapon setup instantly calls one to realize that it's a modern military weapon of some kind. Scarabs are just as iconic and cute on their own, but there's less pragmatism in their design. They're otherworldly and, like I said, ethereal. It's great that both of these, in hindsight, are kind of like mascots for MGS4, since they don't appear in any other mainline game. And yes, I know they appear in Metal Gear Rising, but we wouldn't say they have the same sort of weight visually and gameplay-wise in Metal Gear Rising as they do in Metal Gear Solid 4. The Snakehound unit also has amazing designs, especially Wolf and Mantis, who have that otherworldly grace that a lot of the artificial muscles have, the artificial appendages that emulate the human body but aren't quite there. It's just so interesting. Wolf I really like because there's a contortion to the way the interior of her suit is designed. The way it jumps around, the railgun implementation, the way she, emerges from the wolf. It's so cool. Like, the more I think about it, the cooler it is. The better merit I can assign to it. I wouldn't say they're like Jin, but they do appear to be paranormal in a certain manner. That sort of merging of formal with material comes into play here. But the Snakehound unit, they're great. Gecko and Scarab, also amazing. All the mechanical design is so good. And Metal Gear Solid 4, I would be willing to say, has the best mechanical design in the series. Better than 2. I mean, Ray is amazing. I would argue Ray is better than Rex, but that's besides the point. It just has more. There is more mechanical design and better mechanical design in Metal Gear Solid 4 than every other game in the series. It's amazing. Peace Walker is close in terms of quantity, but not quality. Let's not forget that contemporary trends and tech also ended up being injurious to the game. I'm not just here to glaze how well they used all of it, because first of all, they did misuse some of it in the fact that it's not 60 FPS. Already covered that though, but I do want to reiterate it. The most apparent offense is the awful filters, which often clash with the visual content of whatever scene they are put on top of. The filters are a really bad choice in hindsight. Certainly we saw a filter used in Metal Gear Solid 3, but given that in both cases they are stylistic choices, in 3, the choice cannot be demerited as much as in 4, because in 3, it actually looked good. When you have a filter that's the same color as the scene, it doesn't always work. In 3, it was okay, because you had a gradient of greens. There was more than one green in the scene, and that's how you could identify different objects, and that's sort of how the clarity and proportion came together. But that's not really the case in Metal Gear Solid 4, because you have the PMCs, and their colors in general are the same as the background and the same as the filter. So you sort of just get this like dusty appearance in the Middle East and this automotive grease appearance in Europe. There are more, but the point is that Kojima either should have had better picks of color for the filters, or just made the game more saturated with greater contrast. Because that is another problem. It is not as saturated as it should be. And yes, games are not movies. Color grading and other such things are not nearly as important as the gameplay. But if your games are going to have cutscenes as long and as often as MGS4, such that you get a Guinness World Record at the time of release for cutscene length, you do need to make sure the visuals are competently produced. Part of that, which is not necessary in film, like I said, is making sure the frame rate is consistent throughout. To be honest, slowdown is a creative use of the performance drop of whatever you're implementing into your game. I would actually say in the cutscenes case, I'm perfectly fine with just admitting that it is artistic. But with the gameplay, I cannot let such things stand. That's not acceptable. It's not permissible. Speaking of those hour-long scenes, how bad are they for the game? Because people do complain about them. It is a common complaint. Movie Gear Solid 4, yes, they are long, but the fact that you can skip them, the fact that you can also pause them, there is some control within the cutscenes themselves, means that they don't really have any intrusive or perturbing effect on the gameplay. Sure, there are a few tiny little gameplay sections where you're shown some scene, but it's not the same as the cutscenes. And those are bad. You should be able to skip them, but because they are real time, I'll say it's less of an offense than just an unskippable cutscene. So because all of these cutscenes are skippable, that means that their integration is not injurious to the merit of the final work. And that is different from the appreciation of their content. However, Kojima did, as usual, split each of these scenes into multiple subsections. Perhaps because of space, compression, or some other technical reason, I'm not sure. But it makes it tedious to skip them when you are skipping them, because you just have to hit pause and skip. It's also not as easy as just holding down two buttons as in MGS1 or just pressing skip like you do with every other game. Furthermore, given the quantity of content per non-gameplay section, the player does need to have a rewind or fast forward button in addition to pausing and skipping. The briefings themselves are interesting in terms of how they're put into the game, but many of the gimmicks are silly or extraneous. There's no merit in seeing the same thing from different angles if the new angles don't reveal or show you a new thematic perspective or give you any little tidbits of information you don't already know. What about the content of the scenes themselves? What about the writing? Is it a well-written, well-directed story? We'll begin with the briefings, since we just mentioned them. There is too much exposition. Kojima's writing had plenty of exposition in 3, 2, and even 1, but this is absurd. Next to none of the dialogue in the briefings, which I almost left written down as expositions before I corrected myself, has any semblance of beauty. Rather than the characters relaying Old Snake's objectives to him or discussing what their next objective should be in a back and forth conversation, which is generally how it would happen if we're talking about like verisimilitude or some other angle by which you could write this. All or greater than % at the minimum of speaking lines are expository. Worse still, this exposition is written in a way that the characters are speaking to the viewer directly. At times, they will discuss plot points that they all already know, like Rex's railgun being used as a warhead launcher. I have no objection to characters speaking for the artist, or even speaking to the viewer. These are not inherently bad things, but I do have an objection to inconsistency in those two things, or the poor use of those two operations of dialogue, such as when the speech to the viewer is about meaningless, insubstantial narrative accidents. Kojima has practically, if not actually, made it one of his auteur trademarks to explain pointless crap to the viewer. But in previous games, this seemingly pointless crap was given thematic substance or artistic purpose, which he would lay out in the theatrics, in the dramatic realm, or with the theatrics of a given character. The best example off the top of my head is Liquid Snake describing the super baby method. It does not matter in the least the diegetic fictional science behind the conception and gestation of liquid and solid, but it does become substantial when Liquid turns dramatically and says that because of the circumstances of their birth, that they were both born into murder. Even though that's technically not true, and it was the scientists who killed their brothers in the womb, it's also an artistic choice for Liquid to misunderstand that, because he also misunderstands Big Boss's ideals. Yet, all of that nuance, or going even further, the dramatic essence that there is drama at all, is lost when you write as though the player or characters themselves have forgotten the events they took part in. Rex's railgun being able to fire a nuclear warhead undetected was a major part of Metal Gear Solid 1's narrative, of which every adult character in this scene was involved. And yet they just forgot, oh yeah, I guess Rex can do that. Liquid Ocelot is probably going to commandeer Rex. Incidents of such a type tell me that Kojima's trademark of expository dialogue had become, at this point, less about the artistic essence, the meaning behind the exposition being given, and why it was being given at such a time and place, and more about his insecurities as a writer. Chiefly, his insecurity that, people haven't played 1, 2, and 3. Clearly, the briefings and constant exposition were meant to introduce an unfamiliar player to Metal Gear Solid in general, as there is very little, if any, character development, thematic substance, or artistic essence to any of these briefings. Kojima is just afraid that someone won't know what he's talking about, or what he means. I'll contrast this, as I did in MGS3's appraisal, with writers like Tomino or Mamet, who have zero self-consciousness about the subject matter of their works and choose to be bold with such things, letting the dialogue serve an entirely diegetic purpose. And the only dialogue with a non-diegetic purpose is that which has an artistic statement to the viewer, but even then is still naturalistic and happening within that narrative. Kojima's writing in MGS4, at least in these briefings, betrays cowardice and self-consciousness. On top of all that, all this exposition doesn't even work for most dilettantes and plebeians, since they don't get it anyways. Like, how many times have you heard someone say, oh, Metal Gear Solid is so complex? It's not complex at all. If you played the game, it's not complex. It's very easy to understand. And yes, I am going to admit later that some of this stuff actually does get complex, like Big Boss's change of heart. That's complex. But none of them cite that stuff because they're dilettantes and plebeians. They do not truly appreciate what is put before them, even if it's average or below average. It's beyond them. They are captured by demos, we might say. On the other hand, the mission cutscenes have a greater range of quality and a higher minimum merit. In the best of them, they have excellent action choreography and significant artistic substance. And in the worst of them, they're sometimes frivolous or silly, but rarely, if ever, even when they are expository, do they betray insecurity and cowardice like the briefings do. I would say if Kojima had integrated them in the same manner as with the Microwave Hall and Gecko Attack, this game would have had some goated aesthetics, and I'm being totally serious. The cinematography can be so-so. We have very average, even below average stuff in some of the things like the church confrontation with Big Mama, the conversation in Naomi's lab. You know, these are not, the cinematography is not good here. But in other places, like after Raiden appears, that's amazing. Often it isn't much better than average. However, it can be awesome in certain places. There is a correlation between Raiden's appearances and the cutscenes being great, by the way. Hopefully that's not just me being forced to admit that he's the best character by the fact that he's the best character, but, you know, they are great cutscenes. Obviously, he's not in all the best cutscenes, but he is in a lot of them. Two of the better cutscenes in the game are, like I said, when he appears and jumps in to save Solid, and the final confrontation between Vamp and Naomi in Shadow Moses. Another great cutscene is when Solid meets Big Boss. That one's great. The other parts of the epilogue are okay. Many of the cutscenes don't have bad shots. Some of them do, but otherwise they're mostly good. Let's get down to business and finally analyze the meaning of all this stuff. What's the point? What are the themes of Guns of the Patriots? The title, to me, beyond its presence in the narrative as Ocelot's plan to literally control guns using the Patriot system, represents the idea that ever since the destruction of Arsenal Gear and GW, or at least GW's first destruction, that the Patriots, which I assume to remain for the most part as the AIs, have been left in a formally decapitated state. This is literally true in the sense that Zero hasn't been in control of them since the 80s, but dramatically it became true in the transitional period from MGS2 to MGS4. In MGS2, GW is a complete character within the tale. He talks to Raiden, although through a proxy, but he is conversational. He's got a ton of dialogue and has a full back and forth with Raiden before the climax of the game. Now, none of the AIs, none of the Patriots, who are effectively the AIs themselves, are characters at all. This is the same for a lot of the commanding characters of each faction. Consider that Naked Snake was the main character of the previous tale in production order. It's also the same for Zero. What I'm getting at is that everybody here is fighting for something whose personal character of leadership has been erased. There are no more Patriots, and in a sense, it's just their guns, the artifacts of their life, their remains. We can also apply this idea of fighting amongst the ruins to the combat itself. All these unmanned weapons, ID-tagged guns, and the nanomachine systems are not necessarily the conscious will of the Patriots, but the ruins of the civilizations they had. We're seeing the collapse of an era, the end of an age, the turning of the hands of time, the setting of the sun. All of those themes, of course, I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. War is not the word at all, since the armed conflicts undertaken by the PMCs do not qualify as war. They are not geopolitical actions, they are not ideological actions, they are economic actions. War as a business. War as a business we'll also talk about with Baudrillard, and yes, we are citing him again, because that idea of non-war, the lack of war, or the proliferation of something that is perceived to be war but isn't, comes from him. Nanomachine networks and VR training mean anyone can become a soldier, and that means there is no meaning or merit to soldiering in this manner. It is not soldiering at all, it is laboring, because the glory and honor, but more importantly, the stress and horror of combat has quite literally been taken out of the equation. The system has destroyed specific essential qualities of warfare. hollowed it out and invaded it with its memes, if you recall such terminology from Skullface, so that what is being fought is not truly a war at all. Kojima generates a contrast between this economic activity on the part of the PMCs and the ideological, personal activity of Philanthropy and Outer Haven, who are fighting a war. They do have personal convictions. Reflecting substance, the PMCs and the systems of the patriots they serve, both literal and figurative, are demos, while Philanthropy and Outer Haven take on the traits of Aristos, as they are convinced by ideals and ideas, personal goals, and an ambition, a vision for how the world ought to be. In a way, it can be said that the main characters, being Aristos, have a vision of destiny, of which they are convinced, and the PMCs, being mere laborers, plebeians, demos, do not. This is where we can take Solid's final speech in MGS2, where he saw it deludedly as sufficient for a man to be destined by the fact of conviction and not the substance, shall we say, of the conviction in question. The reality of the age and the war economy have struck him across the face. It is true that being merely convinced of something does not make you a complete man, but it does transform a laborer into a warrior. This transformation occurs in Johnny Sasaki, from being the silly Akiba, fulfilling his duties as a laborer but not pursuing his true goals, to finally saving his love, in a dramatic and literal sense, in the control room of Outer Haven. Both Johnny and Otacon can be called soldiers of love, while Old Snake and Raiden are soldiers of destiny. The soldier of love has an external motivation, and the soldier of destiny has an internal one. Otacon, however, is not a soldier of love because he has found someone he believes is worth loving, although this has happened, and let me explain. The love he fights for is more abstract than that. It is greater. It is a passion for mankind. Philanthropy. Romantic love is incidental to this. It is occasional and a side effect of this struggle, which is on a deeper level about the redemption of his bloodline. His bloodline has done things antithetical to mankind and the love of mankind. To see humanity in such a state he has partially contributed to putting it in, he is called, upon seeing Solid's example in Shadow Moses, to fight for their freedom. Solid and Raiden, though, as we've said, are soldiers of destiny. They are pursuing meaning, a meme they were born or initiated into, an internal rather than external calling. The external combat ability of the characters is, in the drama, inversely correlated with their internal sense of meaning. That is, those who are the greatest warriors on the battlefield are actually in this story the characters most deprived of meaning. Otacon knows his cause, that is, the love of mankind, and that won't end when he leaves the battlefield. Solid and Raiden, however, are searching for meaning in that battlefield, and when the battle ends, they are lost. Solid's recourse is to find his father alive, and Raiden's is to find his lover and son again. Their searches for meaning were both resolved off the battlefield by a passion, be it platonic or romantic, and in both cases also a conflicted passion. In Raiden's case, a lover he believed had left him, and in Solid's case, a father he was once tasked to kill. He's guilty of that patricide that left him and his cloned brother without that meaning, without that justification, that arguably turned them into these hollowed out objects that are invaded with memes to begin with. Otacon and Johnny, on the other hand, already have such passions. They have already found their meaning. It is funny that Johnny, who starts the game as comedic relief, becomes the most complete out of all of them by the end. He has internal meaning and acquires external capacity to pursue that meaning in the climactic act. But what is the meaning of the game as a whole? What is the purpose of all this? It is to say that battle, if it is to be worth anything, ought to be undertaken by conviction, aristos, which is greater than any temporal cause, which the war economy gives. Difference between eternal, or rather immaterial cause and material causes, such as economics, is an interesting thing to put forth from someone who is as materialist as Kojima. Again, this goes all the way back to my first MGS3 review. That dichotomy of temporal and atemporal cause is something that exists in Catholic theology and is very central to it. It's a very spiritual thing to be driven by the atemporal, by the eternal. And it's surprising that his work ends up portraying such a thing. Our heroes in this tale are moral men, at least naturally so, not supernaturally, and so the thesis is logical at the basic level. But it is this naturalism, this materialism, although naturalism and materialism are different, but this is where he falls into error because he reasserts with philanthropy's logo, "Let the world be." Superficially, this statement cannot be held. It does not make sense logically, even on the grounds of natural morality. You shouldn't let the world be. You can let people have private lives, but not to the degree that they conflict with moral law. Letting the world be implies that the world in its natural state tends towards good. This is historically, theologically, just factually incorrect. Man cannot live on bread alone. But Kojima still fails to move beyond his naturalistic liberal ideas, the delusion of liberalism that we discussed in our very first review. The truths he espouses are only incidental to what he believes, and of course, only natural and not supernatural. It seems that he is not able to accept that the supernatural exists at all, especially with this story, given all the talk about nanomachines doing all the work, especially with Screaming Mantis. That ties into the theme of the Snakehound unit being pale, false imitations, arguably simulacra of the Foxhound unit. He is still making a statement by showing that Screaming Mantis never really had psychic powers, or at least psychic powers of any significant strength. This is not to say that he has never written something good, or at least better than average. It is to say that, as with his game design, what slightly above average things he has written and designed as a game designer are clearly incidental to his character and methods, not causal from talent, methods, character, skill, and so on. Not a result of, ironically, his convictions. Even if the final message of the game might be immoral and erroneous, it is good at least that many of the underlying themes are far more respectable. Where does Kojima get this idea of war as an economic action, or rather, war with the absence of conflict of meaning? The idea of the commodification of war. The text I'll be analyzing here is called "The Gulf War Did Not Take Place," written even before Metal Gear Solid 1, by the way, so no one can say he hasn't read it. Again, he's definitely read these texts. He also says he reads a lot, so it's not like he just reads occasionally, and I'm asserting that of the few books he has read, Baudrillard is among them. No, I'm saying he's read a lot of books, and that strengthens my hypothesis that Baudrillard is behind the themes and ideas discussed in his writing. Allow me to quote Baudrillard. We are neither in a logic of war nor a logic of peace, but in a logic of deterrence. By the way, there's that word deterrence, which he loved to use in Peace Walker, which has wound its way inexorably through 40 years of Cold War to a denouement in our current events. A logic of weak events, to which belong those in Eastern Europe, as well as the Gulf War. It is the de-intensified state of war, that of the right to war under the green light of the UN and with an abundance of precautions and concessions. Is this not describing the war economy almost to a T? The de-intensified state of war under green lights and regulations, such as the Rat Patrol, brought about by Patriot memes and AI systems running through human society like decapitated chickens. The runaway money printing of the Patriots' ambitions for a subhuman humanity is depriving us of the right to fight for a cause and supplanting it with the obligation to labor without even the most basic emotions of love and caution. An idea so twisted, it was not even the original intention of the Patriot AIs, who were so evil as to want all of us to exist without ideas whatsoever. The war economy is the worst of both worlds. We are not deprived of ideas because we can still have them, but we are eternally forbidden to act on them. Slaves of a merciless and literally unfeeling or even anti-feeling system which governs our very blood. Let us cite another section, and I quote, "From the beginning, we knew that this war would never happen. After the hot war, the violence of conflict. After the Cold War, the balance of terror. Here comes the dead war, the unfrozen Cold War, which leaves us to grapple with the corpse of war and the necessity of dealing with this decomposing corpse, which nobody from the Gulf War has managed to revive. War has entered into a definitive crisis. It is too late for the hot World War III. This has already taken place, distilled down the years into the Cold War." One of Baudrillard's points is that the Gulf War cannot take place because war itself no longer takes place. For the people of MGS4, it is the same. Weapon control, emotion control, battlefield control. When all of war is controlled, is it war at all? Instead, it is the corpse of war, or not even, just the guns left over by the warriors. And the only ones really fighting over it, because of conviction, are philanthropy and Outer Haven. The right of self-determination to let the world be is what is at stake here. Of course, as we have said, the world has no right to be let be, only to be subject to the divine law. But that's not the meaning I'm discussing here. I'm not reaching here, by the way, when I say that war in MGS4 is not war at all because it is economic activity. In fact, Baudrillard thinks this of the Gulf War specifically, just not in the positive sense that it is or was economic only. The substance of the argument is different, but the statement is similar. And I quote again, a variant on Clausewitz, non-war is the absence of politics pursued by other means. It no longer proceeds from a political will to dominate or from a vital impulsion or an antagonistic violence, but from the will to oppose a general consensus by deterrence. This consensual violence can be as deadly as conflictual violence. It was already at work in all the democracies taken one by one. It operates today on a global level, which is conceived as an immense democracy governed by a homogeneous order, which has as its emblem the UN and the rights of man. Notice specifically how the causes he says violence can no longer be tied to reflect the compulsions or the causes of the previous snakes. Political will to venom, Vic Boss, and Solidus, although not to dominate in every case, and vital impulsion to violence to Liquid. Even Liquid, though, had a political will to dominate. as did Jack in Zanzibar Land. Imposition of deterrence, that was the desire of Coldman and a big part of Peace Walker. As for the consensual violence of battlefield control and the war economy, these all act to destroy conflict itself and establish the hegemony of the Patriots' disgusting anti-human system. It's not just me either. The game literally says this. In fact, I want to make the point that I was right about the Patriots, and Big Boss describes their objectives exactly as I surmised in a previous review.
Patriots were those norms, a neural network reduced to its simplest form. That's what they really represented. Uniformity without individual will, without change.
I'm right! A neural network reduced to its simplest form. The AIs, if they were not already, became demos. And the war economy is the operation of that evil deity Demos in the world. Nothing but endless control. Never conflict, never ideas, no differentiation in any form. Static nothingness, just as the boss desired. And I want to say that specifically, that is what the boss desired, is a borderless nothing world. Kojima even has Drebin ominously mention the UN later, what with multilateralism and all. But as he says, it is a relic. That idea of world peace was erroneous because, as it turned out, the lack of war is not peace. This idea continued in Peace Walker. I already discussed it because I reviewed that game before this one. The concept of peace and false peace, where false peace is the mere lack of war or conflict, which is not really possible, and true peace is that peace can only come from victory in war. The connection of ideas comes from the fact that a lack of war, or as Baudrillard says, non-war, when the absence of politics is pursued by other means, and as Kojima is putting forth in this work, the absence of conviction or ideas pursued by other means, is not only not peace, but worse than the presence of convinced or just warfare. Of course, Kojima says that just warfare doesn't exist in another game, but that's besides the point. Lack of war, false peace, is actually worse than the presence of war. And he's demonstrating this with the war economy, the nightmare of consensual violence and total battlefield control. This also ties into demon, agent, hero, and fool that I described in the first game and developed from Peace Walker to 5 and so on. The demon, who fights justice with injustice, the agent, who fights injustice with injustice, the hero, who fights injustice with justice, and the fool, who fights justice with justice. There's really only one fool that I found in the game, being the boss, and that whole spiel is back in my MGS3 review. But I have talked about the fact that her will was evil, even if she went about it morally. The hero is the only one who can attain true peace, because his victory is just. However, because of the proliferation of non-war or consensual violence, according to the words Baudrillard used, battlefield control, as Kojima described, due to the war economy of the Patriots, the world is perpetually deprived of heroes, and thus peace, true peace, cannot ever be attained. The only way to attain it is through these exceptional characters, these snake eaters, as I've described them. Liquid Ocelot and the actual Liquid take the stark opposite position. Instead of being heroes who, by their example, induce heroism among others, as Vic Boss with the Militaire Sans Frontières and his punished Venom with the Diamond Dogs, their stance is to say that all men must be thrown into violent and genuine conflict to counteract the effects of its prolonged absence. This is utterly demonic, because it means that although it would cause some heroes to stand up from among the anarchic repercussions, the net effect would not be peace. It would be the perpetual defeat of morality, total erasure of justice in war or in peace, a far worse thing than even the war economy could dream. On the other hand, the true peace of victory achieved by philanthropy is far better, because it comes from the resolution of conflict, even if by force of arms. Let's not forget, though, the significance of Sonny Emmerich in this equation. There is certainly a reason that the checkmate move in this grand geopolitical game of philanthropy against the Patriots and Outer Haven was played by her without the use of weaponry at all, but by healing and living through Fox Alive. And we'll talk more about this in a few minutes. Big Boss and the sons of Big Boss, while in their prime, were all on the path of Aristos, at different distances from the truth. But Big Boss, as we're shown in this game, is the most tragic of them all, because he lived to be broken by Demos, while his sons, in a way, were perhaps superior, since they were not changed internally by the battle, but only slayed in the process. We have to compare Jack, Big Boss as he is now, to his most eudaimonic form, Vic Boss, the one who, by his unbreakable will and adherence to his moral mission, reached the furthest point along the path of Aristos via the actually immoral memes trained into him by the boss, having exorcised from it the phantom pain of the boss's life and saved mankind from global thermonuclear holocaust. When Vic Boss died in the helicopter crash, his eudaimonic form was cut open in the striking moment where the self occupies the space of truth and its internal character is revealed outwardly by the slash, drawing from Mishima's work again, and that internal character was mimetically bestowed onto Venom. Punished Venom Snake is, in a sense, Shin Vic Boss, the true deepest sense of the former, the complete instinct for retribution. Ahab was completed mimetically by the mimetic mechanisms that Zero neglected, and became the big boss that the Patriots had failed to recreate, entering the path of Aristos. Ishmael, on the other hand, was utterly destroyed by the act, entered the path of Demos, losing perhaps not the content of the conviction he had, but its quality. They swapped identities and destinies. Jack is a leftover of his own identity, his own heroic character. This man could never fulfill the image of Big Boss, and in a sense was never destroyed in that Mishimaic instant, I guess we'd call it, as all his sons were. However, neither is he afforded the peaceful death among friends as Old Snake is. As we see in the epilogue, he dies pretty much alone, with all his accomplishments being relics of an age past, and all his dreams being the delusions that felled his mentor. Not only is he destroyed in the sense that he can no longer properly follow his own ideals, he no longer has the same understanding of his mimetic lineage's ideals. And this is why we see this distortion of the words of Solidus, Liquid, and the boss in this epilogue. It's very interesting for Kojima to sort of tear down and destroy someone so thoroughly, especially in the sense that this is the last game in the timeline, but not the last game in the series. So production-wise, he essentially deconstructed, or rather denigrated the image of the hero and then reconstructed it with Peace Walker and Five is a very interesting thing to do metacontextually. And I can't help but imagine that he, since he's such a Hollywood aficionado, is drawing from John Ford in the manner that John Ford essentially created the modern Western, or at least modern in his time, and then deconstructed it and then reconstructed it all on his own, which is a much more impressive act, but that's besides the point. Kojima did seem to be emulating that with the way he put Metal Gear Solid 4 not as the end of the series production-wise, but temporally. However, would probably be more likely that he did this retroactively, as each of the Metal Gears he claims were intended to be the last. He didn't intend to make another one with any of these games. Nonetheless, even if he chose to do it retroactively, that is the result, and I don't doubt that he took the example of John Ford. Besides all that, we can see that dying in this undignified manner is the punishment for those who abandon their ideals. It is a core theme of Metal Gear Solid 4 that the men and women of the past cannot really redeem themselves, at least not without destroying something. In some cases, even themselves. Big Boss, Zero, Ava, and so on, none of them could fix their wrongdoing. Redemption. The good guys in this game are all trying to redeem some previous moral error or failure in the face of adversity. And the antagonist, Liquid Ocelot, is the antithesis of this, since he wants to redeem his own failure to execute an immoral plan. In multiple cases, not just Liquid, but also the Ocelot personality beneath it. From a purely narrative standpoint, if we read Liquid Ocelot, that is the uncontrolled personality separate from Revolver, as being in league with Big Boss the whole time, or rather programmed to be in league with Big Boss the whole time, his plan makes no sense. With his dying words, he gave assent to chaos and pandemonium, which was not Big Boss's desire, even in this game, where, he became disillusioned and changed his mind about everything. The Liquid personality and the real Liquid misunderstood Big Boss the same way Big Boss misunderstood the boss. But honestly, what is Liquid Ocelot's deal? Is it possible to decipher what actually happened with him? Because sure, Big Boss says that he was in league with Big Mama, but that doesn't really make sense. That makes a lot of the story beats illogical. And yes, I know this is narrative critique. We're critiquing the plot points and writing choices, but I still do want to discuss this because this twist is very questionable. First of all, the master plan is bad writing. They all have the same goal. This is just like MGS2. Why not just work together? Of course, the afterwards is the difference. The haven they believe in, or rather the haven that philanthropy does not believe in, they are mutually exclusive and only one outcome can be found. However, I just had to rewrite this part. I originally heard Big Boss saying Ocelot, in order to fool the system, used nanomachines and psychotherapy, right? But he says "and" after talking about Ava stealing Solidus's body parts, meaning Ocelot did this after the Big Shell incident. So the Liquid personality that appeared during the Big Shell incident was actually Liquid, which makes my original point invalid, since I was going to question why Revolver hypnotized himself back in 1998 to ruin all his future plans, which wouldn't make sense. However, it also means that what Revolver did to implant the Liquid personality could actually be some form of spiritual ghost medium technique like his father, the Sorrow, had. Notice that Big Boss says rather ominously, for all the advances in nanotechnology, they couldn't achieve what Liquid, or rather Revolver Ocelot, did with the Liquid personality. Revolver was a very cunning strategist and a competent soldier, but it's never really shown in the story that he's any kind of scientist. Sure, he has an understanding of psychology and hypnotherapy because he's a very competent interrogator, but again, nothing like this. That could even be because of his relation to the Sorrow. That could even be a talent that he has with extrasensory perception. So I suppose the implication we're supposed to get here is that what he did to fully transform himself into the new Liquid Ocelot involved some sort of paranormal ability. If he extracted an actual phantom from the haunted arm, then the Liquid personality is actually a ghost. Definitely not the conscious Liquid, like when Revolver shared a physical link to Eli through his arm, but maybe some kind of echo. It's possible that Psycho Mantis's appearance, his haunting of Screaming Mantis's beast suit, was a result of the same kind of echo. However, given that Punish Venom Snake is also technically a result of Revolver Ocelot's hypnotherapy, we could say that only if Revolver Ocelot's skill with hypnotherapy and interrogation and whatnot is a result of his father's talents, then only in that case could we positively say that there is an actual ghost remnant of Liquid Snake in Liquid Ocelot. But well, given Psycho Mantis's cameo, it makes me think that the implication was purposefully put there by Kojima. Thankfully, this doesn't throw a wrench into my more substantial thematic analysis, since I am able to admit that the essence of the narrative is more important than its accidents, and I operate on that truth. Prior to that, I do have a few more things to say here about their plan. Big Boss also being revived as the objective of the master plan between Big Mama and Liquid Ocelot is stupid too, and doesn't make sense. Because if that's true, then why did you program yourself to fight Big Mama? Why is there a conflict between them? Because if you just bought all the PMCs so that you could take over the Patriot system, and then you gain power over the Patriot system, then you win. If she knew you were programmed to do that, why wouldn't she just help you? Why wouldn't you program yourself to accept that help? Or why wouldn't you just program yourself to do what Big Mama's doing? You programmed yourself to have this stupid conflict. They sacrificed hundreds of people as part of a ruse. If Big Mama was just doing this as part of a master plan, that means she enlisted hundreds, maybe thousands of war orphans to die for basically no good reason at all. Even the plan of finding Zero doesn't make sense, since Zero has no influence on events anymore. Before you say that they didn't know this, yes, they absolutely did. And that was actually another retcon. In MGS5, Ocelot and Zero talk about the fact that he's lost control of the Patriots. So there was no reason to do any of this at all. The whole thing makes me think that the epilogue was written sometime after the actual story, which MGS5 also comes after, so maybe that tracks. Maybe there's the son thing. They're meant to sacrifice themselves for the next generation in the plan, but again, there would be a better way to do that than what amounts to slaughter for the sake of theater. If you take the boss saying their master plan as them making one plan that they agreed on, then all of MGS4 is just an elaborate suicide pact that only incidentally achieved anything. In fact, it would have plunged the entire world into chaos and anarchy for no other reason than to bring Big Boss back to kill a decrepit skeleton, if not for Sonny, who none of them accounted for, by the way. it makes Big Mama just as evil as Liquid. Although Big Mama was evil even in the first game. Well, not first, but the first game we reviewed, MGS3. So who really cares, I guess? I don't know what to say. The idea of erasing Zero, sure, even for vengeance's sake, that might make sense, but the possibility of Zero becoming 100 again, look at him, dude. That is not happening. And you really knew that wasn't happening in the 80s. But again, that was something Kojima wrote later, so whatever, man. Whatever, though. It's more constructive, as I always say, to look at the themes and meaning, the essence, instead of the accidents. In Liquid Ocelot's final words, we can find the meaning, the sun theme.
We are beasts created by man. Unless the light is put out, the shadows cannot be erased. So long as there is light, erasing shadows will do no good.
Each act is named after the suns. A double meaning, obviously, the first being the sons of Big Boss, but its other meaning is here. Suns shedding their light on the world, creating the shadows and strife of the age. This age, as we're reminded in MGS5, is defined by the sons of Big Boss, the Snakes, and the sons of the Patriots, the AIs. The previous age was defined by Vic and Venom, and Skullface and Cypher. Notice how all of these are depicted in the game too. Like the new life form, the Patriot AIs being depicted as a giant orb of light, a sun. My analysis points to the third age, now that these suns have set, as being defined by the Emmerichs, Hal and his daughter chiefly. Remember that it was Hal who organized philanthropy and does virtually everything except the soldiering, which is up to Solid and Raiden. Don't forget Emma's contribution in Substance. Naomi's contribution as well, Al's lover, who granted them the nanomachine vaccine and the second part of Fox Alive. And finally, Hal's adoptive daughter, Sunny, who completed Fox Alive using both Emma and Naomi's work, finally obliterating the Patriots' despotism in order to let the world be. If there is any moral meaning to philanthropy's motto, it is there. The fundamental mission of moral leadership, to free the people from evil, a new sun, to let the world be free from darkness. Why do you think Kojima called her Sunny? Beyond that, if we're talking about sons who are liberators, we know whose birthday it just was, and I'd like to say Merry Christmas to everyone watching, since I missed it, but my goal was not to release this before Christmas anyways, just hopefully before or a day after the new year. Back to Hal Emmerich's age, he also is on a quest for redemption for both his mimetic and genetic line. He descends from Strangelove and Huey Emmerich, two very flawed individuals, arguably evil in, well, both of their cases, actually. Huey and Strangelove created Metal Gear, the walking nuclear weapons platform, perfecting it from the research Huey did with his friend, fellow engineer and scientist Alexander Leonovich Granin. The shadow of these suns is the namesake of the series itself, and needs little explanation. Hal in MGS1 was attempting to exorcise this curse from his bloodline. Metal Gear itself is the cause of all his phantom pain, especially the loss of his sister Emma. But there is another phantom pain within Metal Gear. Do we not recall that Metal Gear Rex, Hal's creation, was meant to shoot down nuclear weapons? Hal's design was for missile defeat, And the railgun, based off the Strategic Defense Initiative, would have used its super high velocity projectile to intercept warheads rather than fire them. This loss of what likely would have been the ultimate answer to the terror of global thermonuclear holocaust is itself a phantom pain, just like how he lost Naomi, Emma, Wolf, Huey, and Strangelove. Like the rest of his passions, platonic or romantic, this desire to purify his parents' legacy and pursue his own interests was destroyed by the spirit of the age. The way everything good that happens to him and everything good he desires of the world is taken away from him, twisted or annihilated. Philanthropy is his answer to that vision being stolen from him. It is his declaration as a soldier of love to let the world be, such that an ambition for good is not stolen from the meek, such that he can give and acquire recourse for the injustices of his lineage. The moral meaning of to let the world be, freedom from the evil sons and shadows. According to this definition, it is then related to the basic duty of Plato's conception of the state, which is to give recourse to injustice, or with a positive phrasing, to acquire and enforce justice. Philanthropy, being tied to the necessity of governance, statehood, and order, is necessarily opposed to the boss's will on a fundamental level, that being a world without differentiation, a world without states or borders, and thus a world where the meek have no recourse. The eudaimonic state of the soldier of love is the philosopher king that Hal Emmerich becomes as the herald of his age. Not to say that he literally rules over the world, but that he finally found a way to proliferate philanthropy, to enforce justice where his predecessors failed, and exorcise the world of its phantom pain. Liquid Ocelot, on the other hand, inverts that concept. Ocelot dealt with plenty of loss, but most, if not all of it, is his doing to some degree or another. The real Liquid and the Liquid personality are truly murderers in temperament and care even less than Revolver. Liquid is perfectly happy to throw the world into pandemonium where men kill for their own satisfaction. These are two soldiers who ultimately love killing itself. They take pleasure in violence and mayhem. If anything, they think it's their right to take pleasure in violence and cause phantom pain, to cast shadows. When Old Snake is fighting them, he's battling the refusal to accept phantom pain at all. He's battling pure evil. Perhaps nowhere else in the series is there any better representative of the demon archetype I've described than in Liquid Ocelot. He is someone who fights justice with injustice and doesn't care in the least. He doesn't even have the pretense of justice as his goal as Volgin did or as Coldman did. Even Ocelot was like this. Ocelot in 3 and 5 was perfectly happy to do injustice for the sake of his goals. He and Big Boss agreed that killing an entire hospital's worth of people was acceptable if it meant Jack could escape. These guys are just evil. And Solid, in a way, is, I hate to say it because I like Venom and Raiden more, extinguishing the sons of an evil age. The same kind of sons are their origin. This is their redemption. Extinguish the sons of the age, casting all the shadows, and the next day can come. Solid slaying Big Boss in Zanzibar Land, Liquid in Shadow Moses, Raiden slaying Solidus on top of Federal Hall. Solid now brings it all the way back around by slaying Liquid Ocelot, the one who escaped them in MGS2. Liquid Ocelot, seeing as he is both Revolver Ocelot from the age of Big Boss and Liquid Snake from the age of the Sons of Big Boss, is literally a zeitgeist, the living embodiment of the spirit of two ages, actually. But that Geist part is inverted again, because the ghost in this case is actually from the younger age and not the elder. That a father, which Revolver was to Liquid specifically, would have to bury his son is an unfortunate and one of the most common effects of war. And Liquid Ocelot embodies that horror, that specific phantom pain of the loss of the next generation. It's not just that, but that Ocelot is cannibalizing the image of Liquid for this sake. Solid Snake is metaphorically defeating that phantom pain, the hell of conflict itself. But also, in a way, this does tie into the Patriots and the way they cannibalize the age and take away from the next generation their capacity to fight for their ideals. If the light persists, the elder is cannibalizing the younger, as Solidus attempted with Raiden, and Revolver succeeded with Liquid. You're Pretty Good is the final admission that the only one of Big Boss's descendants, direct descendants, to not be a son of war, but a son risen against war, a son of true peace, was Solid. The shadow of one age is the son of the next. It is obvious that Liquid Ocelot and Old Snake are platonic opposites. One is a beast made by the Patriots, and another is a patriot made by the beasts. They are not, however, true opposites. They both fill the same role. They operate under the same mechanism of war. The juxtaposition comes from the system they originate from and the system they choose to fight for, and the way they fight for it. The true opposite of Liquid Ocelot is Sonny Emmerich, who is a doctor like her mentors and not a soldier, in contrast to her father, not following in the mechanisms her father took, and who desires for the world, instead of chaos, peace. One such sun and one such shadow meet in the epilogue. Notice the doves flying away at their meeting, the same as with Raiden and Solidus. And yes, I do think the CQC into Hug was necessary, diegetically and thematically. Not only is Big Boss the guy that Solid kills twice, he doesn't know what he's gonna do. Thematically, the battle is over. There's no need to continue fighting. It's time to let go of fighting. It is appropriate that we have essentially already analyzed the first half of the epilogue thematically, and that we pull the plug on that in the same way Big Boss did to Zero. Notice the close-up of him turning the knob to the viewer's right, clockwise, signifying the end of the age in the way I described prior. Sure, every knob is right to tighten, but Kojima wouldn't have put it in a close-up if he didn't want us to see the significance of that here. Jack then describes the mutated Fox die in Solid dying off at the behest of the new. The attack of the new on the old is healing him in a way, but he's still doomed to die. The light going out is a necessary part of the sunset. It is bittersweet in a way that the person he thought is his father and is genetically his twin brother is really only his brother in arms, which he fought in the same way he fought Gray Fox. While all the ties they have are genetic, the only ties they feel is the mimetic tie, being both soldiers of destiny. Kojima hides in Big Boss's explanation the fact that Big Boss himself misunderstands the boss's will. Boss's will is, in fact, such a world, such a horrible nightmare as Demos would dream, as she describes in the climactic act of MGS3, and was also correctly recalled by Zero in the tapes of MGS5. The boss does want it, but Big Boss didn't, and it seems he wasn't able to accept that the boss died for such a horrific cause, since the alternative that Eva outlined is just as brutal. Used up and spit out by the country she served her entire life. Unfortunately, here he is at the end of his story, fallen victim to the same delusions of liberalism that the boss did, and departing from the Aristos path. His last act, the killing of Zero, was not his triumph. instead the product of their age. They were doomed to die anyways, as all men are, as Big Boss admits. And perhaps because their legends outlived their destinies, we could say that they were dead men in spirit regardless. Their sons took the reins of the world from them. It is also sad that Big Boss sees this war as fruitless or pointless. The fruits of the war were the very future he describes in the next sentence. Instead of the past of the Patriots and the past before that of Cypher and Big Boss, the future of philanthropy is certainly a brighter one, with fewer shadows than the last two. However, it could be said that he's talking about the internal war of Solid Snake, that he's still fighting in emotion or inclination after having already achieved true peace. And if we take it that way, yes, he's correct. It is fruitless for Solid Snake to keep having the need to fight. But Big Boss, in his final moments, is perhaps gripped by senility more so than reality. His description of the boss's mission is simply not true. Not once did she ever say that leaving the world exactly as it is was her mission. Neither was it the philosopher's mission. And after all, her dream was the same as the philosopher's, a world without borders. Since division is the natural state of the world, this would necessarily require the world to not be left as it is. It would require an overthrow of both the status quo of the moment and of fundamental truths. How can such a thing be congruent with leaving the world exactly as it is? Even Solid Snake, who perhaps had suffered less than Big Boss when he confronted Raiden at the end of MGS2, had a more developed and intelligent thing to teach to him. Big Boss's recollection of fighting for liberty from norms, systems, nations, and ages is unfitting for the struggle of all of these characters. Liquid, Solidus, Vic Boss, and so on. Only in the context of the Patriots' norms, systems, nations, and their age does it make sense, but the way Big Boss phrases it as though they were rebelling against the concepts themselves is not true. Liquid sought to establish a new nation. Solidus sought to establish a new system, and both fought essentially to institute their own age. However, it is true in the context of what he says to Solid. Maybe the previous lines had some errors in translation, but when he describes Solid as no longer being a prisoner of fate, this is true. Liquid, Solidus, Vic, and Venom were indeed all fighting against some kind of fate imposed upon them. In such a way as they are fighting for an internal meaning, they might all be called soldiers of destiny, even though not all of them were good guys. I also disagree with Big Boss's second to last line that the world would be better off without snakes. A few of them might have been evil, but more of them were good. The idea that the world is better off without them, perhaps, if we trust Big Boss's authority on the matter, but it is more truthful in the context of the whole series to say that heroes and snake eaters leave the world better off. You know, the more I ponder Metal Gear Solid 4, the more I like it. It's not just appreciation, which is divorced from emotion. I do genuinely enjoy the fact that Kojima finally found a way to do stealth action on a single system at the end of it all. The 5 series basically use the same controls, but they changed the location of the camera. And on top of that, Phantom Pain isn't stealth first, it's action first. So MGS4 is very unique in this aspect. Truly one of a kind, even if it doesn't really take that system to its true potential. The universal controls vulgar stealth in a unified shooter framework as opposed to classical stealth with the space-time continuum. I think this game does a great job mechanically with its systems. The most injurious things to the net merit of the game are not the mechanics, but the layers and layers of systems they put onto them, break them down with, and the fact that it has some really bad levels. The aesthetics are amazing, and I would say it probably has some of the best designs in general in all of Metal Gear. But it's worth repeating that the filters and low frame rate are a shame and are mostly injurious to its aesthetics. The same way the bad level design ruined the potential merit of the game overall. Was it a good game to end the series? No. Was it an okay game? Perhaps. I did enjoy playing it and beating it, with the exception of Act 3, of course, and there's something oddly enchanting about the game, even if it's not amazing. All this appreciation comes out to a final rating in terms of net merit, a final score wherein we account all the deficiencies and accomplishments of the creative work in question on a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 is worthless garbage, should be actively avoided, and a 10 is a perfect piece of art which must be understood, of 3.5 out of 10.